Wait! Before you skip ahead and continue, check the timestamps, playlists for other floor sets, check my merch store for Deep Dungeon apparel. Cue the intro. Hello, I am Angelus Demonus, with an updated Dawntrail live tutorial guide for Palace of the Dead solo on Machinist, if your goal is to get the Necromancer title. If you do intend to aim for the Necromancer title, and you have stumbled upon this video but have yet to even unlock Palace of the Dead, I highly suggest you give my how-to ether pool farming and leveling video a look. While it discusses an optimal method to level your deep dungeon power levels as a solo gamer in general, it will also provide information on how to unlock Palace of the Dead and how to approach it completely solo from the beginning on any job. This live tutorial guide will cover floors 1 to 50 and will focus on more of the introduction to your Necromancer journey as a machinist, habits to form, and a handful of notable mentions that are known to catch newer and first-time runners off guard, such as final stinging bees, exploding slimes, the floor 20 and 30 boss, you name it. I highly suggest gandering at the timestamps in the description below if you wish to look for specific information that may help you or floors you might be stuck on. If you are looking for the other floor sets, be sure to check the playlist on the upper right card or in the description below. A very big difference between this guide and the previous ones in Endwalker and Shadowbringers is I will suggest a much lower entry point, which includes me starting this file with 5959 arm and armor, as well as a starting sustaining potion count of 20 and 0 starting glamour and potsherds. This is something I'll go into detail during the beginning of the live tutorial guide, but I hope it will make this challenge far more approachable and less intimidating to get yourself started. Another difference between this guide and the previous ones is that I have limited live chat interactions and kept the focus strictly on deep dungeon content. This will play almost like a Deep Dungeon podcast with gameplay and a couple of viewer questions sprinkled in. I have learned from viewers of previous guides that they like to play along with the video up on another screen or monitor while they do their own run, and it's almost like I'm talking you through the run in real time. If you have any questions on anything that goes on with this run, things I may not have covered, or if you are confused on anything, be sure to leave them in the comments below and I will try to respond as soon as I can. My goal with these guides is to make the grueling challenge of the Necromancer title approachable and viable to all skill levels. No single question is silly, and every single experience is unique. Be sure to keep me posted on how your runs are going. Good luck, have fun, and I hope this guide helps you. Welcome guys to the live tutorial of the Machinist, the Dawntrail version. We've done this guide twice before, and a lot of people did like the one from the previous expansion. And from that previous version, I wanted to do quite a bit to fix up this one coming up, making the new one, the one that's going to be set for hopefully the entire expansion, with the exception of maybe some major changes on the job, which, you know, we're not expecting that from happening, but even if it's just small potency changes, you shouldn't see too much of a difference from here till patches in the future of all of Dawntrail. And should that happen, I'll probably just go and remake the guide. And that's really nothing off me, it's more content for me, right? Now, a couple things that we're going to do that is going to be different on this guide versus all the other ones that we've done before is we're going to adjust our entry level into this content. So every time I've done this guide, we always had 99 arm and armor, and I always had a stock of sustaining potions, which you see right here, 822. And I remember having this one comment of someone, you know, like an angry YouTube comment, being like, you know, when you start the guide, you know, I'm kind of thinking it from like a beginner's perspective, but you have all this aether pool and you have all these potions, you know, why don't you have something that does it from the beginning? Something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing, but it was along that context, and I'm like, well, look, I mean, if you're going for Necromancer, one would think that maybe like you had some thought into it, you know, but it's still a fair comment. Now, I do have a how to level your ether pool from the beginning as a solo gamer that we made a couple months ago as of this video that was made. So that is actually a good starting point if you literally just unlock the content and then climb your way up. So that's the perspective of that one. So I recommend starting with that if you want to like actually start, like if you walked into this content, maybe you ran down your achievements and you're like, oh, I want that one, and you never unlocked Palace, start with that video, because that'll be a really good start video, especially for solo. And funny, we had actually one person here, I'm not going to name who they are, but they were just here. They were complaining about the queues for Palace. They're like, oh, the queues are so long. it's gonna be harder and harder as the content gets older and older to actually get in with people, because, you know, most of the people are high levels and stuff like that. We're going to enter this content in a lower entry level. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to dip my arm and armor to 59. And 59 to me is actually just a little bit lower than I would recommend. I actually usually, in the video I was mentioning, I was recommending that we go in maybe minimum 65. But there's going to be two reasons that you can start at this level or a little bit above that. First and foremost, let's say you're really starting this off as your first time in the run. Very first time, like you want to get the title and this is your first go around. I'm definitely going to recommend, like, you don't necessarily have to go and start at 99. You don't have to grind all the way up to 99. Starting at something like similar to me is not a terrible start, because you will presumably open silver chests on your way up, and these silver chests can level yourself up even from floor 1. So hopefully you'll see it by the time you get to the higher floors of this guide. When you see like floor 100, so on and so forth, you'll see my arm and armor get to respectable levels of like 80, 90, so on and so forth. So if you're like someone who's going to assume you're going to take more than one attempt, you know, maybe 1-2 attempts, you could actually even start lower than this. You can even start at 49, 50, whatever it might be, because then your first attempt you'll get to like 60, 70, 80, you'll die somewhere because you're still learning, and then you'll go back and now you're starting at that new Aether Pool. So that's why it's okay to start at lower Aether Pool. So you don't have to necessarily start at 99. It is kind of recommended to be that number if, like, you really feel like I'm going to get the title today, right? Now, if you're someone who's going to maybe go through each floor of the guide 10 by 10, and you have a lot of confidence going in that way, you know, you're not someone like me who needs to grind your butt into this content and do it over and over and die over and over to make it happen. Maybe you want to start at a higher number. Maybe you started at 65, because we've had people who have literally, like, went on their first attempt, spent a lot of their hours studying the content, and actually cleared on their first and second attempt. Now, bear in mind, that's like learning the information differently, and everyone learns information differently, so, you know, don't think of it like if you're on attempt like 20, you're having an issue. It's fine, because that other person probably just learns it in a different way, is just absorbing the content differently. So we're starting here at 59. Second to this, one of the big important things that we have, which I'll have a video about how to farm these potsherds, is the Galmorian potsherd. You get these from bronze chests. You also get a guarantee from killing floor 50 and floor 100. It's one of the things that is huge to have, because they transfer into sustaining potions, which you see here. And you can see the description of the sustaining potion here, that it gives you a passive regen in specifically Palace of the Dead. It's one of the biggest things that allows us to solo the content. But let's assume that you're, again, starting at your first bit of the content, and you haven't done much time, etc. So I'm also going to dip these down, and we're going, if I can open my saddlebag, we're going to bring out all of my potsherds off of here, and I'm going to bring in my excess here at 802. I'm going to put them all in the saddlebag. So we're going to have a starting sustaining potion of 20, no lower than 20, or no higher than 20 rather. This'll kind of have a starting point of like, okay, well, maybe you've cleared 1 to 50 Palace of the Dead at the very minimal, and then now you've kind of going back to go for the solo title. You'd have at least one posture because you killed 50, so we'll start with a 20, but we're actually going to climb pretty far up without having to use this at all. And on top of having a 59 Aether Pool, we'll also see how many potsherds we get on the climb up, and kind of showcase that you don't have to have a very big starting amount of potsherds, especially on a job like Machinist, if you're choosing to do Machinist. So that's our whole starting intro. So let's get the file started up here. Go on. This. Okay, so floor 1, you're not going to expect too much out of this in terms of the difficulty of it. At least you shouldn't. But there's going to be some very important beginner things that you want to know off the bat. First and foremost, you want to be hugging the walls, because there are traps in the middle that can happen. So you'll see me kind of running along the walls almost this entire run. So it's something to bear in mind, something to get used to. The more you dive into the middle of the rooms, the more likely you hit a trap, which could complicate the run. Some of the first set of enemies that you have here are the palace sprites, but they're really not much to talk about because they're going to die very quickly in terms of, because of the machinist and everything. And they're level 1, so there's not going to be much going on here. You also want to be collecting the treasure coffers, the gold ones, as much as you can, because this is what gives you the power-up. Although, Ironically, the one we picked up isn't really a power-up because it has the chance of giving you the intuition sacks, which is like treasure chests that you can get. But you do want to get to gold chests as much as possible because they are the things that can help you through the run as you're going through. Now, one thing you'll observe from my run here is we will check all of the rooms in the map. So I checked all the rooms here, and we're going to try to kill everything. This is something that I suggest for the lower levels, for people who are doing it for the first time. Because this will keep your own level, your level within Deep Dungeon, which is a separate leveling system, at a pretty good starting amount, so that when you reach the bosses, you're not going to have this like weird difficulty scale. Because if your level is a lot lower than the bosses coming up on floor 10, you may have a little bit of a difficult time killing them, or they might hit you pretty hard, which is one of the things that causes some early deaths, and we'll talk about that once we get to the specific floors, etc. So we got off the first floor. Now, even though we're going to spend a lot of time, well, presumably we're going to spend a lot of effort, I guess is the more appropriate word, effort in terms of killing everything, it won't actually take a lot of time. You'll see, we're still going to go pretty fast along this floor. Second enemy that we're encountering here is the Death Mouse. Again, not too important to mention because they are first sight aggro, but they're gonna die pretty quickly with your GCDs. Probably the most deadliest that you're gonna run into in the early floors is going to be the Antelope. So that's here, but they're gonna die in like 2 GCDs. But again, watch how we are fighting all the enemies. We are going along the walls, and also worth mentioning here is that the hallways, this is a hallway that we're standing in. Hallways do not have traps, and it will be a very good habit for you to kill things in hallways. Because if you kind of kill things in a room, while you're going through a room, it could cause a lot of issues. You could hit a trap, so on and so forth. So it's going to be beneficial to you to kind of respect these potential traps and to pull everything as much as you can into hallways. And you'll see us do that kind of throughout the run. It's something that I think I take for granted in terms of mentioning it, and I'll try to mention it a little bit as often as I can, so it's a little bit obvious, because even like people who are like have done a couple runs into their own experience, they don't actually realize that the hallways are safe without traps, you know? It's just something that we got used to doing, but we kind of don't mention it after all these years, and then of course someone coming new into the content doesn't realize that, so. Okay, we are on floor 3, so we're checking all the chests. If you notice earlier, we picked up a silver chest, and we actually got a +1 from there, and our weapon changed to red. We are getting level ups even this low, and that's why it's really good to... That's why it's not a problem to actually be a lower level in terms of your arm and armor. We're not 99.99, we are starting at a lower one, but it doesn't mean that you're reducing your chances of victory. If you notice on the arm and armor, it is italicized and yellow, because the lower level that you are, the lower the cap of the arm and armor that is needed. So I have 6059, but we're not operating at 6059. We're operating at maybe like about 3+, 3.3, or like 5.5. So it's not a terrible idea to have actually a lower one. You're not gonna expect the arm and armor to be uncapped until about floor 94, so that's why it's okay, and the damage difference is not that big, so let me answer this one. Perfect. Is there a way to predict how many kills are needed to exit a floor? Does the key mean anything? Very, very good question. So we've kind of pondered that for a long time about, is there some way that we can decipher, like maybe this key means this? And the short answer is no, there really isn't. The key is very random. There doesn't seem to be a correlation between the color that you're seeing and how many possible kills you need thereafter. I've seen the key go from a light blue straight to opening. I've seen the key go to like 20 shades of orange before it opens. Now, in terms of that question in general, kind of how we typically operate on the higher floors is you're going for an average. So, for example, on the higher floor, you're like, let's say you're taking the middle set of floors. So you're talking like 131 to like 190, not including the last set. Your average kill count to get off the floor is going to be between 4 and and about 10, 9, 10. So just take it down the middle what the median is, which is about 6 or 7, and that's what you're aiming for average-wise. But you could still get the lower limit and the upper limit of that kill count, it's possible. But the key never has indicated about, like it never shows you what it can be, so on and so forth. Now, this room that we're walking in, which sometimes we'll call a donut room, although it'll make more sense in certain other floors, but this room in particular is a little tricky because of the potential trap locations. I'm going to use a site here, a Pomander site, which is going to reveal the floor. And sometimes, this, even if you're hugging walls on these types of floors, you can still step on a trap. You know, so here's one example of a trap right here. This is what it looks like, but you don't see it until you do a Pomander site. And even if I hug this wall, you have to hug it really tight to avoid these things. So these type of rooms are a little tricky, and I definitely would advise people to kind of give respect to this type of floor when you're going in. Again, use the hallways to kill stuff, and like get everything killed first, and then move through the room. I'll definitely mention this a lot more as we're climbing through. Now this trap in particular, this is a trap here that's important to know. This is a luring trap. This is something that can cause a lot of people a lot of issues in terms of their climb, so on and so forth, because this spawns 3 extra enemies. Now, a lot of times the way around a luring trap, you kind of want to have a game plan already when it happens. Either have an understanding of like your level discrepancy versus the enemy, understand what they spawn for, but if you just want a very simple answer, if you happen to hit this luring trap and you're like, oh my god, there's a lot of enemies, witching is your first answer, because witching is going to change a lot of these things to one of 3 things. Now, you're going to see 2 chickens and an imp here. If they are chickens, they're hitting about 50% of their original damage, around 30, 40, 50% of their original damage. If they are an imp, which this Goblet is, this is hitting at about 80% of their original damage. So it does depend on what does spawn. That can determine how much damage they're doing. If they're a toad, it's really good because they're gonna hit you for like single or double digits. But either way, a witching is a good way to avoid any disaster from a luring trap if you were to step on it. This one right here is a landmine, and a landmine can never kill you, which is important. You can step on a landmine. It is based on your current HP, which is about 80%, I believe. So 256. You can do the math on that one. It's useful because it does splash damage on enemies as well. But Machinists won't typically use landmine plays just because you are DPS, you do have the damage to compensate for it. You'll see that more on like a warrior run, a tank run, a healer run, so on and so forth. But it's still worth noting because that's kind of what happens if you hit that kind of trap. No traps in between rooms is really nice, because you do want to take advantage of it. Now, what is going to be interesting though is that you don't want to automatically assume a hallway is safe, because look at this hallway directly in front of us. There isn't too much room in this hallway that exists, so if you're going to utilize the hallway for a safe place, you know, it might be a little tight depending on where you're going. We just killed a palace bat there, which is going to be sound, I believe. It's, again, a lot of these enemies are not going to be too threatening, up until you start getting to these higher ones, when you start seeing double-digit ones, but they're just going to take a couple more GCs to kill. Hippogriffs are going to be sound down here, but by the time you kill them, there's not going to be much to them in terms of killing them. And again, we're hugging along the walls just to make sure that we're going to be avoiding any potential traps, so on and so forth. Peloton on Machinist is also going to be something that you're going to look to spam because of the movement speed that you get from there. And it's one of the big things that kind of is appealing to Machinist, is that you do have this passive out-of-combat movement speed that only a physical range really has. Well, Ninja has it, but like, you know, the tanks don't have it, the healers don't have it. So it's something that, like, if you're moving X% amount faster on the floor, that's saving you a lot of time in terms of movement, especially when you're going back and forth between rooms. We are maintaining killing the enemies on the floor to keep our levels a little bit higher. Again, this is something I recommend for newer players hopping in if it's your first time, so on and so forth. Once you get more comfortable, you can kind of, you know, push yourself to go a tiny bit faster, etc. But I do recommend killing the enemies and checking all the rooms as best as you can, just simply because it keeps your level really in order as you're climbing through the floor. Is sprint only for movement? So that's a good question, Killerjolt. For Machinist in particular, sprint on the higher floors is going to be really important, because when you open with a sprint on an enemy pull, it's a lot harder for them to catch up to you to kill you. And that's going to be important for more difficult things, you know? Also, let's talk about this Dung Beetle. This is probably one of 2 enemies that can cause you a lot of problems. So we're going to pull this thing. This thing is going to do a dive-in attack, a rhino attack. This does hurt a little bit, especially if you're not running one of the defenses here. So it's something that you want to be careful of, especially if you happen to pull a couple of them in together. Try not to do that, but just kill them as fast as you can. I didn't know physical range move fast like Ninja. They do. They move real well. If you have Peloton, they can. That's where the movement speed comes in. Ninja has the passive that's part of their kit, but Machinist and Dancer and Bard, so on and so forth, you hit the button and it is good movement speed in between. Okay, now we have the other fun one, which is the other important enemy to mention here. It's the Hornet. The Hornets are proximity. Proximity basically means whenever you get close to them, they will aggro. But this tends to be an interesting killer to many people. It does do what we call an enrage, which is the final sting, and this one does it fairly fast. And the only real reason you're probably going to run into it is if you're trying to fight something else and you leave this thing alive. One way to avoid the final sting is literally just to run away from it. Once you get far enough, then it will not cast the final sting. So that's one way just to deal with that, which is really good. Keep it really simple. It's for some reason, if you've kept it alive long enough, just run away from it. You could have line of sighted too, but just keep it. I mean, you're a Machinist. You're running away anyway with damage, so you may as well just run away from them. Checking the silver chests. And again, we are hugging the walls to avoid potential traps as much as we can. It's going to be a habit you do want to form early on. Especially when you go through your climbs on the higher floors, because actually the next set is going to be a little bit more annoying in terms of avoiding traps, so it would be a good habit to form on these early floors. Alright, so we are off the floor, but we're still killing, and we continue to open some of the gold chests to maintain our powers. We have more Pomanders power-ups that we have accessible to us now. And we're looking pretty good on the opening floor set. And a lot of the early sets are basically like setting yourself up and using them kind of when you start to get to more difficult things. Hopefully you don't have a problem on the first couple of floors, but again, if you're starting off first, you know, it's gonna take a little bit of getting used to, so on and so forth. To the exit we go. Alright, 3 more floors to the boss. There is a boss every 10th floor that you're looking for. And once we get there, we'll kind of discuss a go-to strategy, especially again for the newer players, so on and so forth. Now, one discussion I could bring up here, especially because we're talking a little bit more about the mechanics of the game and just the overall part of Deep Dungeon, so on and so forth, is kind of the more fun question about, you know, why Machinist? Why are we doing Machinist? There are a lot of other jobs that can be doable for Necromancer, arguably better, arguably a little bit worse, so on and so forth. And one of the big ones that do get talked about is Warrior. That's definitely in the category of what people may choose to do for Necromancer. But in my opinion, I mean, you have so many options. Even comparing Machinist and Warrior on the run, they are 2 extremely different jobs which require 2 very different skill sets. So you as you watch through this video, as you watch through the Machinist runs, you can kind of look at it and kind of decide, okay, I kind of like this playstyle, or maybe you don't like the playstyle, and that's perfectly fine. You have options to go for. But Machinist is definitely one of the jobs that has been very popular with people over the years, over the expansions, in terms of trying to get this title. I guess you can maybe understand it as you're watching the playthrough to see why it's good. I think one of the common questions I get on the run is, like, if they've never seen Machinist before, they're like, I don't, you know, how does it heal itself? How does it keep itself alive? Well, it's the running around, it's the kiting, it's the so on and so forth. So let's take this Coplin, for instance, and let's do like a fully respected pull. I'm gonna open with sprint to get the full 20-second sprint, and we're gonna pull this thing. Now I'm just gonna try to kill this thing with auto attacks. As we're running away, this thing is not gonna be able to touch me. Well, it just touched me there, but it's not gonna touch me very much here. and we are able to kill it without too much damage. And granted, it doesn't do too much damage to begin with, but that's essentially our strategy for almost every pull, especially when we get to the higher floor, where a tank will have mitigation, defense, to use and to heal back, especially like Warrior with its raw intuition. You're kind of mitigating by not taking damage. So if you're not taking damage, you're theoretically mitigating the damage that you're taking. That's why Machinist is very strong with this content, and it's also kind of a pure DPS job in that sense versus Bard and Dancer, which are a little bit more support. So all of your damage is going out to the enemy, and that's why it's become a very popular class for people to pick. Now, we used an Intuition on the previous floor, which is this one, the Pomander of Intuition, the one useless Pomander, if you will, unless you want to make money. What you'll see me do, and this is going to be different from runner to runner, is the yellow beam is right there. If I step on that yellow beam, I stand there for like a couple seconds, you'll hear like a fancy tone, and then you'll be able to acquire a treasure, which, provided you beat the floor, you'll be able to exchange it to an NPC to get some goodies. You won't see me get this very often, because there is a tendency to step on a trap to get to that yellow beam. Now, it is kind of something at your own risk. If you really want the money, you know, you're like, dude, I really need the gil. Well, then go for it. But a lot of times there is a potential that you could be heading a trap, so you will not see me go for these yellow beams very often. But just for an example there, so I'm showing it to you. Okay, Stakes asks, at what point with Machinist are you starting to need sustaining potions? Additionally, do you earn more sustaining potions than you use when you're doing attempts, or do you have to go out of your way to farm them? So this is actually going to be a very, very good run, Stakes, to kind of discuss exactly what you asked for. I am starting this run purposely with 0 pot shards and 20 starting sustaining potions. Now, I have done a run where I actually climbed the floors, and we did not use any sustaining potions except on the bosses. And that really mitigates the amount of sustaining potions you actually use throughout the floors. Now, it's not something that I would necessarily recommend, especially for someone going for the first time, but if anything, it does show an example of what Machinist is capable of doing. Now, on a typical kind of climb, I probably would see people using sustaining potions somewhere around the 90 boss, where the 90 boss would be a little bit tricky if you don't use them. The 100 boss, for sure, you're gonna need some. 91 to 100 will be a spot that you may need to start using some potions, because some of the enemies do hit a little bit hard, and depending on what kind of debuffs you get, can also dictate that. And then the next kind of category you see it on is probably about 131 or 141. You start using a little bit more heavy on the potions, but there's a lot of gap between those to potentially get pot shards, to farm them up, not like actually go out of your way to farm them, but to kind of collect them on the run, so on and so forth. But that is one thing that's going to be, I think, interesting on this particular run, is that we're starting with a much lower base to kind of demonstrate that you don't actually need to start with that much, and you can get through with some strategy and some gameplay on Machinist. Okay, so we're on the last floor, floor 9, coming in. Our level is currently 19. The boss is level 20, and you want to be as close to that boss level as possible. Now that we've killed everything going through the floor, we've checked every room, checked every chest, and we have managed to keep our level up. We are going to be at a good level against the boss, which means the boss isn't going to hit us as hard. But I will recommend you to use the Strength and the Steel for the boss regardless, just to kind of make the whole experience a little bit easier. I definitely recommend almost every boss to consider a Strength and Steel as you're climbing up. It'll keep the risk very low. You can very well, like, try it after the first time you Strength and Steel. You're like, you know what, this wasn't as bad, and trying to go without it. But typically, if you are checking all the chests, you're going to keep the Strength and Steel moving, so you're always going to probably have it as you're climbing up, so that's why it's not too big of a risk here. Another thing to do note that we did not see it on this set, but bronze chests, which from floor 1 to floor 30, I believe, 30? Yeah, 30. You're going to get mimics from bronze chests, but they start at floor 7. I did say floor 1, but floor 7 is when you start seeing bronze chests. We didn't see them today, but there is a possibility you can get a mimic this low. And they're not going to be so bad here, but they can be a little bit bad on the next set, but we'll worry about that when we get there. So we're going to be entering the boss here, and there's going to be a couple things that we will set up on the boss. So, the bosses climbing up are not going to be overly complicated. Their mechanics aren't tricky, they're very simplistic things. They're just maybe you can just look at them as more trickier normal enemies, if you will. But there's a couple things that I definitely recommend you doing. First and foremost, having a strength and a steel. We're going to pop a steel here. Steel gives you a damage reduction of 40%. The strength gives you a 30% increase in damage. And this is very, very important to have, especially for survival for a DPS. Other thing that's going to be very important on, did mention it as we were climbing, but we are getting potion high quality, right, where is it? Here. Potion high quality from killing enemies. Now, I do have a lot, but you will get a respectable amount. You're only going to need it on this set. It is something I recommend having on your hotbar temporarily, just for this set in particular, because this is actually a really good heal for the 1 to 10. 22-second recast, you're almost going to get a full heal from it. And if you're operating with very little sustaining potions, or none at all, this is what's going to keep you alive. So you can get away with this without the steel, because the steel will be, you know, it's a little extra defense, so on and so forth, but the potion will definitely help you. Now, I'm just putting it on my hotbar just for the sake of demonstration. A lot of times I just menu it because I'm only going to use it for this floor. But definitely do not consider using like a max potion, hyper potion if you have those accessible to you, because the cooldown is so much longer. So this is, there you go, max potion. 1 minute 7 seconds for 30% HP at a higher max. You're not going to get that much HP from the maximum potion. So you do want to use the appropriate potion here, which gives you the appropriate amount of HP. And even with Steel on, we are level 20 against this level 20 boss, and it's not doing too much damage. Now, even if my HP is dipping, we have the regular potion which you can use, much shorter cooldown. I could use a second wind. My second wind is going to be like 90 seconds. So 22-second recast of the potion, perfectly fine. And this will be a lot more paramount on the next floor, which tends to kill a lot of people. But there's your 1 to 10 experience. Hopefully you didn't have too much of an issue on 1 to 10. And we are now 21, so there you go. Yeah, we didn't go over too much about the actual enemies, but honestly, because I feel like the enemies, because they die so fast now, it's just kind of like, oh, you know, they do things. I mean, the beetles and the bees are probably the most important part of the run, especially if you're going through the floors, being careful along the hallways, being careful along the walls. You're probably not triggering traps, therefore you're not running into small issues. So floor 11 to 20. One thing that's definitely interesting about this floor, this tends to be a set that does kill many people, funny enough. It's only the first 20, but there's a lot of ways to die here. And I would say this is actually the wall for beginner players, which is really funny to say, especially if some of you are listening, like who's done runs and everything. But maybe some of you agree with me that this is actually a wall. And we'll kind of discuss a couple of the things that can give you a little bit of a problem when we go in. So let's hop on in to 11 to 20. Let's do the run. Now, one thing that you'll see me do as a consistent basis on the opening floors is I will tend to open with a strength as we go through. The strength does help me kill the enemies, especially because once you transition from the lower floors, once you go from 10 to 11, 20 to 21, there is a little bit of a gap between the enemy levels and yourself, no matter what level you are, even if you've kept the killing going. So this will kind of help you keep the kills, keep the kill speed pretty good on the floors. So I definitely recommend having a strength going through the floors. And again, we're taking this very carefully. I'm killing the things in the hallway before proceeding into here. Now, I mentioned this on the previous set. This is what we call a donut room, and this makes more sense because it's a literal, like, you know, donut in the center, so on and so forth. But these are the floors that have a really tricky trap location, because even if you hug the walls like I just did, there's a possibility you may still hit a trap. So what I definitely recommend as you're going through these floors, especially moving from this set moving forward, is you want to kill something and then proceed through the room, or proceed through the room and then pull thereafter. So you're not kind of causing like a double whammy in terms of having an enemy on top of you, and then hitting a trap on top of that too. Now, the bronze chests are here. Possibility it's a mimic, which I'm really hoping it is. It is! So the thing with the mimic here if your level is a little bit lower, look at the level discrepancy, 27 to 22. This thing could hit me pretty hard, which it is. So what I would actually recommend is here, you hit a witching here, because it is hitting me hard. I still have the regular high quality potions in, so use that for healing. And then we could drop the Mimic this way. You're going to miss a couple hits because of the discrepancy of your level, but that is definitely a go-to way once you see a Mimic this early, and this can apply to any of the floors moving up. Consider a Witching, consider a Steel, and we are operating with a little bit less sustaining potions, and let's say you're operating with 0 sustaining potions. Okay, well make sure that you do that as your first course of action, because those things are going to hit you hard, which it just did without Steel. One thing I'll do here, we did get a high potion drop off of the enemy, and as we did on floor 10, we had the regular potions on our hotbar. We're now going to put the high potions, which is the next tier of potions that drop, onto our high bar, and use that for our extra healing if we need it. And that Mimic was definitely a good place to do that. These chests keep exploding. Now, the thing to note about those exploding chests, that does 70% of your max HP. If your HP is actually below 70%, which you can look at your own HP there, see the percentage up there, it will kill you. So make sure that you always check a silver chest with full HP. Definitely something to get into the habit on, is that you check it with full HP. And this coming silver chest that we'll walk into, there's also another habit that I will tell you guys to do. So one thing that's really, really important to do is if you get to a silver chest like this, kind of count 2 seconds before you open it, because you might get into this wombo combo of a landmine into a silver chest, which can kill you because of that combination. It's a really nasty combination, but you could save yourself by just standing in front of a silver chest before you're actually going in. Now, the enemies that we're encountering, they are dying really fast because we have a strength on. This leech is sight over here, so it doesn't do much, especially because it dies. This frog is going to be a little bit more of a concern, because it does do a pull-in. In these lower floors, it's not half as annoying, but it's going to be a little bit more annoying later. But it does do a pull-in with Sticky Tongue, and then it follows in with a point blank. Something to note if you're kiting it around and you don't kill it fast enough, and then you're all of a sudden surprised that it pulls you in. That's the move that it does, basically. Again, that could be bad if it's pulling you through a room, but again, if you're fighting through hallways, then you're not going to be too worried about it. The Ergonites here are going to be sight, and they are pretty easy to kill as well. They're going to die pretty quickly. The patrol in here is the Pudding, which is a proximity. I'm going to walk here. You can see it's going to aggro. It is a caster, but you just want to watch out for it because it does walk throughout the room. Patrols walk throughout the floor. That's why we call it a patrol, because it is patrolling, if you will. We continue our wall hugging into these floors to avoid as many traps as we can, checking all the chests as well. We have a Steel, so a Steel has come back. Now, one thing that I have personally just noticed is that our affluence is sitting at 3. One thing that I definitely recommend, especially with affluence, if you're sitting at 3 affluence here, you probably want to consider burning it and keeping it at 2. It does sometimes, I think it does do a flat rate, but it does increase the amount of chests that could spawn on the next floor, and especially while you're still building your Pomander's stock here. Running an affluence is not a terrible idea. You could wait till the overcap, but I've definitely started to get more used to being a little bit more aggressive on my Pomanders, and something that some people tend to have a separation on, trying to get themselves to use Pomanders a little bit more. So it would be kind of cool to get used to that on the lower floors and get used to that early on, so that as you go to the higher floors, you can kind of have it in mind. Blinded, as simple as it is, you do tend to miss on enemies when you're going for it, so it kind of sucks. It's not terrible on Machinist, but blind is usually kind of one of the nastiest debuffs to deal with, because it's just very annoying. This slime is the first thing that you will encounter that could possibly kill you. This has an enrage within 23 to 25 seconds. I actually have a clip for that, which we'll put into the video later on. But every time you encounter a slime and decide to kill it, give it a full respect, stand in a hallway, and just kill it. Because if you leave this alive too long, it will do what's called Rapture, and it will one-shot you completely. Like, no mitigation, no nothing, you're just dead, especially as a DPS. Slimes have killed many people in the history of Deep Dungeon, so definitely respect them anytime you see them. Keep in hallways, just drop them, literally just stop, kill them, and then move on. So something to note with those guys. That's probably the first thing that's probably going to end your runs, and even as of recently, I hear people, oh, I died to a slime, I didn't realize I had it, or I died to a slime, I didn't know that it enraged. Yeah, I would love to demonstrate it. That's why we took a clip for it before. But it can definitely end your run if you're not careful with it. And also, like, if you, let's say, hit a Luring Trap and you have to deal with multiple, you do want to focus them down or use a Witching if that's the case, so that you can respect them completely. But everything else on this floor, bar one other enemy, they're pretty straightforward to kill and not too complicated. It's just that is definitely the first concern of that run. You've had a few silver chests explode on me so far, says Rory. How threatening are they, and are there still anything to tell you to avoid them? Is there anything to tell you to avoid them? Great question. So, the reason I'm opening them up right now is because our arm and armor is not 99.99. And we did that on purpose to kind of demonstrate a little bit of a lower entry level into trying to go for Necromancer. So we do want to check the silver chest because we want the arm and armor to go in. Now, if you were capped, if you were 99.99, you can totally avoid them because they won't really benefit you per se unless you wanted to hit an enemy with an exploding chest, which is very unlikely to do on a Machinist, but it's still a strategy, you can still utilize it. Now, in terms of its risk, in terms of how threatening they are, really, like, you wouldn't want to really open a silver chest unless the coast is clear. Like here, like, there's nothing in here. Let's say this is a silver chest. We're okay, we just open it, we get boom, and it's fine. We could wait for our HP to come back. We could heal it back if you wanted to with the high potion. But especially when you're still climbing to getting your arm and armor, you do want to check all of them as best as you can to level the arm and armor, but just give them kind of a safe look and make sure kind of you're not opening them around enemies, so on and so forth. And do that kind of wait tactic, like if they're in the middle of the room, like I mentioned, in case you get a trap on top of it. How much percentage stronger is 99.99 over 89.89? Wondering how much scarier pulling Aether Pull gifts. Wonder how much scarier pulling Aether gifts might be. So, I don't have the raw numbers on top of my head, although you can see it from the HP. I want to say, man, if I want to say it's like, I don't know, like, if anyone has that info off the top of their head, maybe it's like a 1%, 2% addition each arm and armor that it adds to you. So, like, the difference, like, on the eye test, if you will, the difference between 89 and 99 is not going to be massively significant. However, you're going to want to be 99.99, especially on the higher floors. I mean, you just don't want to miss out on that damage because everything will just take a little bit longer, especially if you're lower arm and you have a little bit less HP if you have lower armor. And that's one reason that I may recommend, like, okay, so we started this run at 59.59. If you're someone that is looking to, like, maybe you're on, like, your second, third, or fourth run, you can totally exchange arm and armor. I wouldn't dip it lower than 69 if you started at 99. Because you do want to give yourself a chance to get it back to 99 by the time it's important. I used to, back in the day, I used to actually dip it to 79, and I'm usually back capped by the time I'm around floor 110 or 120. So if you dip it to 69, you're probably looking at 130, 140. I'm kind of expecting to maybe get back to cap at around maybe like 150-ish, if anything. But again, this is kind of a little bit in respect to maybe the first-time runner who's going to assume that you will maybe have a couple runs under your belt before you actually get the title. But if you want to get in here to get the experience, to learn the mode, just to see how far you go, there's nothing wrong with starting off at like where I am at 59.59 in my opinion. How do you get the equipment out of the palace? Perfect. So beginning of this stream, bar 6, we exchanged Aether Pool with an NPC that accepted, that said forge Aether Pool grips. So what it will do is it'll take 10 away from your arm and armor, and that's why we have currently 60.59, because we started at 99.99 and we got 4 grips from that NPC. Do I have it here? I obviously should. Right here. Aether Pool grip. You need a total of 9 to get the red weapon that I have on, but it actually is 3 for the white weapon, the weapon that you start with in terms of, like, when you first open the content, you have this, like, white glowy weapon, and then you need 6 more to get the red Kino weapon, right, that we have here. So it's a total of 9 Aether Pool grips. But you do that on the NPC outside if you want on the glamour from there. Waiting for this, opening this chest. Again, we are continuing to hug the wall here to avoid any possible traps. Our strength is down, so you're going to see that our kill speed is going to be a little bit slower. But I will chill for now. I have 2 strength, so I'm going to kind of either wait for another one to come in from a chest, or if I get closer to floor 20, then I will use another strength so I carry it into the boss floor. Now here's the next thing that is potentially dangerous, the Cobras. 2 things that they're dangerous for. 1, this is one of the few enemies that has a legit 360 gaze in Palace of the Dead. And if you are even, I believe, even if you're behind it, you will get petrified. Now, the petrification just basically stuns you for, I think it's like 20 seconds or something like that. And it's a little nasty, especially if you have other enemies on top of you. So it's something that you do want to respect. But if you're killing one at a time, it's going to be something not too concerning. But the other little nitty-gritty detail about the Cobras. If you turn into a toad, you hit a toad trap, and then you aggro a Cobra, the Cobra will do a special move called Devour, which will one-shot you. It's a very, very specific move that the Cobras have. So, we told you that the Slimes are one enemy, and we're gonna use the Strength, by the way, because we had 3. The Slimes are one enemy you want to give a lot of respect to, because they can explode, they can enrage. The Cobras are going to be the other one, which are patrols, side aggro, because you just don't want to hit a trap while fighting the Cobra. So get him in a hallway, kill them, and then move on with your life. Okay, moving along, we are still checking all the rooms and still checking all the chests. And you'll see, this is going to be very useful for your leveling. Again, as the first time runner coming in here, if it's your first time going, if your first time trying it, this is something I recommend. It may take a little extra time, but it's going to make it a lot safer and a lot more consistent. As you kind of go through with a little bit more experience, you can skip kills, you can skip rooms, you can be a little bit more aggressive on Pomanders, but you still want, in my opinion, you want to have a starting way, like a starting foundation, and then you start like building off of it, you know? So that's what we're doing right now. Kind of guaranteeing that climb up to make sure that at least we get to see those higher floors with some type of consistency. Another chance for a Mimic here. No Mimic here, gives us some high potions, so that's perfectly fine. So the bronze chests are the only ones from 7 to 30 which can be Mimics. You cannot get a Mimic from a gold chest or a silver chest until we get to the next kind of tier of floors, so we're only gonna get them from bronze chests right now. Gonna check the other room behind me over here, again checking and hugging these walls for now. Level 30, so the boss on this floor is 35. And I would say one of the biggest reasons why people die on this set, aside from the Slimes, which is probably the #1 killer, the Cobras I would say are a little less of a killer for people, but it still can cause some deaths, you know, all of a sudden surprise you're dead kind of thing. The boss in itself is one that it's difficult, especially again if you don't have any sustaining potions, if you're not sure about how to properly handle it, or the more common reason why you die to it is because your level is actually lower than the boss. The boss is level 35. And this killing all these enemies as we're climbing up is literally the precise reason why we are doing it, so that we can make that specific boss a lot safer. But again, I will be restricting my use of my sustaining potions, even though we have 20 on me. We will be relying on the high potions to heal me. We'll also be doing it a little bit of the longer way. And I'll mention it now, but I'll mention it again later, but I will typically do a lust on bosses because it will kill it faster on the lower floors. But we're gonna kind of forego that for today because we're just gonna kind of demonstrate the boss in a more kind of traditional manner, if you will. And that's just in case, you know, maybe you didn't pick up a lust, and I gotta tell you, from my experience, sometimes you don't pick up a lust, so we're definitely gonna go with the more common strategy to execute, the things that are moving forward. Also, I haven't really talked about too much of these enemies because we are just kind of killing through them. This Nanka does shoot from you like this. In the later floors, it will shoot afar, but they are also sound. A lot of the enemies here are going to be sound-based, so you can walk past them. We'll do a demonstration on the next set about that. And what sound-based means for aggro sound is that you can, what we'd like to joke about, RP walk, which is toggling the walk button. So if you see in the top right corner of my screen where you see the Eorzean time, you see the little symbol of like a walking person or like a person there. That means we're walking. Now for a keyboard, in my case, or mouse and keyboard, you do have a toggle button that can pull this off. For controller, it's a little bit different. You have a button, I believe you can hold one of the buttons to, like, if you're moving, you hold the button, then you start walking. Or you can use your analog stick to slowly kind of move it in to, like, walk. It's a little bit, like, different on controller. But basically what this does is that there are enemies in Deep Dungeon and in the game in itself that are considered sound aggro. Which means that if we're walking like this, we are not going to aggro them. Now, actually, this enemy is funny because you can see the radial on the enemy, the two side here, and then the front radial, which indicates where its front actually is. So if this was sight, this would aggro, but it's actually a little bit hard to see. But this is what it means to be sound aggro. So you can get past all the sound aggro by RP walking. Now I'm going to go to full speed, I'm going to take off the toggle, and I'm going to move next to this thing. This will aggro, right? You're going to aggro, right? Today? Yeah, okay, there you go. Like, oh, is it my turn? That's what it said. But that is the difference there. So a lot of enemies, especially on the higher floors, will be really useful to know what's going to be sound aggro. Here it's kind of, you know, kind of whatever since you're killing it really fast, but it's at least a demonstration knowing that that thing does exist. And there are a couple things in here that are going to be sound. The Ochus here are going to be proximity, so I'm going to walk past these guys, but they're going to aggro regardless because they are proximity. And proximity means that it doesn't matter if you're in front or the side, if you just get close to them, they are going to aggro. So I'm kill these out. The Nanka over there, the other ones, the smaller ones, are going to be like their bigger versions that they are also sound. And again, like the reason why that's kind of useful, if you want to kind of get through the enemy, it's perfectly fine, you can just do that. Now, the Morbles are proximity as well. They're probably the hardest enemies here just by level. They're not going to be complicated here. They're just going to do bad breath, and you just kind of either run away from them or run behind them. I definitely recommend running behind them. But they're going to be a little be a little bit more beefier than some of the enemies that are here. But we are continuing to level up, so that's always a good thing. We are maintaining killing things on the hallway here to be safe. Again, this is something that is extra cautious, extra safe. You don't need to do this on your run. You can be a little bit more aggressive as you're going through. But as the first time we're going through, you may want to at least consider that for now so that you can understand that there is a safe way to do it, especially with the traps that are potential here. But hugging the walls, if you've noticed as we are traversing through them, we've been avoiding a lot of traps. So that kind of gives you an indication of how safe it is to potentially walk along the walls. It isn't perfect, because there are traps along the walls, but for the most part, let's just say 85% on what we call the cave floors. If you're walking along the walls, you're more than likely avoiding these traps from these cave floors. So definitely worth doing to kind of keep away from disaster, if you will. Now that bronze chest, again, can be a mimic, and I'm going to kill this Nanka first before I pop this chest in case it's a mimic. Ah, now we have the special thing. So, perfect example. Thank you for showing up, this NPC. You will see some oddly spelt name enemies on the floor. This one, in this case, is called a staff-spinning adventurer. You'll see a various amount of NPCs on the floor. They are what we call special enemies, and they are rare spawns. For, like, points, they're actually really, really good points. But basically what these are, in terms of lore, they are just, like, NPCs or characters that have died within the story and have been resurrected by the Necromancer. That's why they exist here. And they are going to be kind of spread out through the floors, and again, it is very rare. We could have gone through this entire run, you never saw one. Now, the thing with these guys is that the easy way to remember them, about what they are, how difficult they are, is that they are basically the same difficulty as a Mimic, except they don't do any special abilities. They just do auto attacks. So for the higher floors, it could be a little dangerous because they can hit you pretty hard, and they're not like stopping to do a telegraph or something. They are proximity, which is worthy to note. So if they are in your way, you may need to kill them. But that is what you see as a special enemy. So if you see like this weird thing that is only very unique on the floor, it's like, oh, okay, that's a special enemy. So does proximity aggro through Ninja stealth? It does. Proximity does affect the hide for Ninja. Ninja stealth / hide can avoid sight and sound, but it cannot avoid proximity. Now we have our first instance here of a Gloom floor. What a Gloom floor does, by the description here, enemy movement speed increases, enemies deal more damage while also taking less. So if you look at an enemy here, you can see their buffs here. Damage up, vulnerability, so defense up, and then movement speed up. They're not sprinting per se, because it's a sprint icon, but they are moving faster. This is one thing that could get a little tricky, especially when you go into the higher floors. You just have to respect that they are going to die slower and hit you harder. Now, with our level much higher here, it's not going to be too big of a risk. It's just things are going to take a little bit longer to kill. Now, if we were to hit like a Luring Trap, that can get a little tricky because now you're dealing with 3 enemies that can potentially be, you know, hitting you a lot harder than you'd expect it to be, especially if you're not running a Steel, so on and so forth. Now, speaking of Strength and Steel, on the previous set, we used the Steel on the boss. Because we got to the boss, we used Steel, we wanted to do that. One thing that I may recommend is once you get to either the 8th floor or the 9th floor, you can consider popping your Strength and Steel that will lead you into the boss. Consider this. The buff is 8 minutes. From this floor, at least on the lower floors, you can probably get to the boss within 8 minutes, and the bosses are not going to take that long either. So at least you get the benefit of it on the lower floor that carries you into this floor, the next floor, and then into the boss. Now, kind of as we get a little bit further, you'll probably see me start using it at 9 instead of 8, but that's perfectly fine. Here's a perfect example of us hitting a trap along the wall. We were moving along the wall, and boom, we hit a frog trap. Frog trap is 20 seconds, but we're just going to keep moving here in a circle to kind of avoid the damage coming in. It is what it is. You just try to stay alive as long as possible. Luckily, we're fighting something that isn't too dangerous. Once we pop out, we can go in. Now, one thing that's notable about the frog trap, it will dip your HP to, I believe it is 70% of your max HP. So I had 1454. Let's just say it had about, I don't know, 1100 or something like that. When you pop out of the transformation, you will be at the frog HP, not your original max HP. And that's worth noting, especially if you're still fighting something, that you're not going to all of a sudden regenerate your HP. You're going to be at the HP that you were left at when you transformed. So you have to be a little extra careful. Maybe even prep a heal the moment you pop out, just in case your HP is a little bit low here. Alright, so we're off the floor, we're hugging the wall. First trap that we stepped on, nothing to it. Let me check the silver because we are trying to level our arm and armor. Hold for a couple seconds and then open. Get into that habit. Let's go to the 9th floor. You had no idea about the walking icon guy. I don't know if it's something that you can move around in terms of your HUD. I think it might be attached to the Eorzean time. But yeah, it's it's a good way to actually have this like this actual tell from the game being like, yep, you're walking right now. You're RP walking right now. Seedlings over here are proximity. The Ochu and the Morbol are... Oh, I'm sorry. Seedlings are sound. Ochus and the Morbol are proximity. And this one is right on top of the exit, so this will be a priority kill. Something we'll discuss a little bit into the higher floors, but not too important since we're trying to kill everything anyway. Do snakes still swallow you if you are a frog? Yes, they do. That is still a mechanic in this game. Why it's a mechanic in this game outside of, I don't know, like IRL, you know, IRL mechanics? But it is totally a thing. And so, I had mentioned this earlier, but if you are fighting Cobras, especially on this set or the one 100 floors later, full respect to them. Just fight them in a hallway, kill them first, and then move along. You do not want to move through a floor while dragging them along and leashing them as you're trying to kill them, because if you just did what I did on the previous floor, which might be why you asked that question, if I turn into a frog while fighting that Cobra, I'm dead because it will do Devour and one-shot me. So there are a couple, like, I guess that's one thing that's interesting about this content. There are going to be kind of ebb and flows in terms of how you handle certain enemies. Like in this instance, I'm taking this Immortal with me as I travel through the room, because this enemy is not going to be too treacherous for me to deal with. Now, certain enemies like the Slime and the Cobra, are going to be enemies I need to give a little bit more respect because they have those special mechanics. But these certain ones, like I can take this risk as I'm walking through the floor, hugging the wall, so on and so forth, getting our kills in. And it's okay if I hit a trap here, because these are not going to be too deadly to manage right now. Our level, by the way, perfect. Oh, and here's our first instance of a treasure room. So, we call this a treasure room. JP, you'll see, call as a monster room. Basically, what this means, there are 2 characteristics to a treasure room. Or 3, let's say 3 characteristics to a treasure room. 1, it's intimidating. That's the first one. 2, you'll see a lot of enemies here. They usually like to shove a whole bunch of enemies in here. It's almost like ×2, ×3 of what you would typically see. On top of that, another very distinct characteristic is that there are always 4 chests in this room. So that's why we call it a treasure room. And JP calls it a monster room because there's a lot of monsters in here. Now, what you can do in this room, this is actually really good XP if you want to. So you can kind of get rid of them one at a time. You could also kind of run the risk if you want to do some AoE pulls. But here, it won't be a terrible idea to kind of get this, especially on the lower floors, because this does mean a lot of extra experience points, which is really nice. Now, the only other problem that we have here is I am running that Strength and Steel, so I may not want to take too long here, since I do want to get it onto the boss going in. So we'll be like here about a minute as we kill him through the floor. I like the Monster House version. I remember when I first heard about that and how I think people were saying how it was related to like Pokemon mystery game, mystery dungeon, I believe is kind of where they use that. I thought it was such a cool name. But definitely for like NAEU, we will refer to it, or you'll hear me commonly say treasure room. Or what I used to say back in the day, I used to say nope room, because a lot of times I would see that room and I'd be like, nope, I'm out, see you later. So we have a couple aggro here, but I do have that Strength and Steel on. I'm not too worried about it. There's also another patrol coming in. Apparently another one had spawned at some point. The patrol is sight, so you'll see me kind of move around here to maneuver, and it's not going to aggro because it is a sight. But it's not a big deal. It's not too deadly of an enemy. After this kill, I'm going to move along because we do want to get to the boss with our Strength and Steel on. We are watching that timer because we don't want it to wear off on the boss since we did do it early. One of the downsides of using it as early as I did, I wouldn't have expected a treasure room to show up, and if I had used it on this floor, then I would have enough time to clear that treasure room. But it's okay, we got a couple things out of there, and we're going to move on and go to the exit now. Now, one thing to check, I did put my high potion on my hotbar, and if you have not by now, I highly recommend it. The high potions have been dropping as you are killing things on this set in particular, and I'll just showcase that before we kind of pull the boss here. So again, you don't have to put it on your hotbar. I'm just putting it on my hotbar just for a demonstration purpose, but you are getting right here. Oh, I'm using the wrong keyboard. You are getting it right here. High potions. This one right here. 22 seconds heals you for a little bit more than the regular potions. 440 versus 200, so it's really good to have. Now, on this fight, I typically do like using a Lust here, because you will get Lusts on the climb up. But in this situation, we're going to demonstrate this boss without any sustaining potions and without using the Lust, and we're going to utilize the high potion to heal us. Now, one thing to note, we are 1 level higher than the boss. We are 36 because of all the killing that we are at. And this is not going to hit me nearly as hard as if you were like, let's say 32 or 33, so on and so forth. So we're going to have a lot of defense going in. And again, I do recommend having a Strength Steel regardless if you're a higher level, but especially if you are a lower level. Now, after that raid-wide AoE, it's going to be summoning 2 B-Ads. You do want to kill them priority, because after about 3 line AoEs from this boss, it's going to cast Final Sting. These beasts right now are pretty easy. You're going to encounter this boss 100 floors later, and it's going to be a little bit spookier as you go through. So there's our 3 line AoEs, we're just going to continue damage, and as you can see, our HP is perfectly fine here. We are not in risk here. We are going to take a big hit here from its kind of tank buster, but we do have our hyper potion, our high potion ready to use. We just use that to heal, and we still have our second win to go on this boss. So again, benefit here, our level is higher. We did pop a Strength Steel, and we are using those quicker heals to keep us up, and that is 11 to 20 right there. Always kill the bees. Do affluence palms increase the probability of treasure rooms? So, statistically speaking, they seem to, yes. I believe our buddy Mr. Delicious Darebon has found out through heavy sample sizing that it is about a 3% chance to get a treasure room chance with doing an affluence there. Can Frog combo with Silver Chest to one-shot you the same way landmines can? Yes, because the Frog's Rory dip you to 70%, and if you pop out a Frog and then you pop a Silver Chest, you are sitting at that delicious 70% HP that can kill you, and I've died like that before. I've actually died in the reverse way too, where I was opening a Silver Chest, and then I hit a Frog Trap, but the Silver Chest snapshot me at 70% at full HP and did a 70% of the full HP, and then the frog dropped me to 70% HP and then killed me that way. That only happened once, and we have a clip of that on my channel. Do flight palms decrease monsters in treasure room? No. A treasure room is still a treasure room. It'll still have kind of the roughly the same amount of enemies that you expect it to have in that room. And yeah, it doesn't reduce the enemies in a treasure room, and also, statistically speaking, a flight can increase the chance of it being a actual treasure room. That, aside from an affluence, a flight does that too percentage-wise. It's a very small percentage, but there is a chance that a flight can give you a treasure room. What tips would I give yourself if I was going for Necromancer? Give myself? You know, someone asked that question before, Tata. If we're talking about myself, it's very difficult, because the era in which I was going for Necromancer was an era that we were trying to chase impossible. So I wouldn't really answer that in the respect of talking to my past self. Rather, this is where kind of this guy comes into play. Like, what am I going to try to tell someone else about, you know, if they were going for the Necromancer title for the first time? And one of the big ones I would say is be patient. This is a test of patience. This will take a long time. Even if you do this as a one-shot, it's still taking a lot of hours, you know? And you were mentioning Savage. I mean, Savage, you guys have probably been grinding Savage for hours upon hours. I mean, it's kind of the same thing in some respect if you're talking about a time thing, like time-to-time ratio. You know, you're still spending lots of hours to actually do the content, but you're also not seeing the same thing over and over. You're seeing a lot of different things and trying to react to a lot of different things as you climb in. But patience is probably the biggest thing I'd say. What are your options? The key is inside the treasure room. So it really does depend on the floor, Hugo, of what floor set we're on, what kind of enemies we're dealing with. The first recommendation I actually would say is it would be good to discover the treasure room early. If you're on the higher floors, it does help to figure out what everything looks like on the whole floor set. So you can try to discover the treasure room early. And then ideally, let's say you're only about 2 kills into the room, you would then work the treasure room to clear out a way to go to the exit. That's the best option. Now, your other options is to kind of do as I said, but then you're kind of doing extra kills where you kind of carve a way to the exit. Like, let's say the exit... Okay, this is actually a perfect example. So if I'm looking into this room and this exit's on the left side, you want to clear everything on the left side that could be proximity or that is guarding the exit. You don't want to deal with anything on the right side where the entry point is. Forget about those enemies there, because that's just extra kills that you don't need. You just want to carve out a way to get to the exit. That's what you want to do there. Worst case scenario, you do like a rage, or you do some bigger palms to get you through. But ideally, you want to just handle it normally and just get the kills in and just kind of stay calm and go in. Do I recommend Machinist above all other jobs for Necromancer Chasers? No. I recommend it in the category of what you're looking at here. In terms of you like the kiting, you like the damage. You know, this is a job that definitely is going to be a high pick for a DPS class, but it is definitely in its unique form. Because this is a really good question, because, you know, what about Warrior, right? Finn did his Warrior guide a little bit ago, and I can't like realistically compare Machinist to Warrior, and Warrior cannot be realistically compared to Machinist. Those are two completely different classes that accomplish things very differently from each other, right? So, in my opinion, there's no way you can actually really say that Machinist is by far better than Warrior, or Warrior is by far better than Machinist, because they just play so differently. But they are going to come down to preferred playstyle. Some people will look at this stakes and be like, I don't like this playstyle. I don't like running around. Maybe you're like a standard player. You know, you play on standard, and like whipping your character back every time you GCD is so freaking annoying, and you're not willing to go legacy. Look, it's fair. I mean, I'm not going to do dish on everyone's playstyle. Warrior, you don't have to do that. You don't have to change off of Legacy. You don't have to change off of Standard. It's all mono. You don't have to kite. You don't have to go off of Standard. You just fight enemies through there. You have really good healing, really good defense. You just have to work the clock, and you have to be really good against the clock. Machinists typically won't lose against the clock, Of course, you're going to lose against potentially getting hit really hard, but that's where kiting comes into play. So it just comes down to your playstyle. So, I mean, I do recommend Machinist over, let's say, Bard and Dancer. I do recommend Machinist over a handful of a lot of the DPSs, but even then, like, Reaper is still really good. Sage is still really good as well, you know? And Pictomancer is one that's going to be definitely talked about quite a bit coming up into the future, so... I mean, for what this is, you know, for a job that people will recommend and see a lot of clears on, this is a really good one. Let's hop in to 21 to 30. Before we go into this floor, there's a couple things that is worth noting on this set. One, this is actually the next set that has given a lot of people some trouble. I've seen a lot of people and heard a lot of people die to the very first floor, or to the boss that's coming up, floor 30. And I would say, amongst all the floors available, this is the one that has, theoretically, the biggest difficulty spike of the entire thing here. Because, and this is where it was beneficial for you to level early, and I think we're currently 36. Because the lower and lower level you are going into 21, the harder these enemies are going to be, and you'll feel it. Things are going to feel beefier, things are going to definitely hit harder. If you end up actually getting a Mimic on 21, the level disparity is huge. I think the level of the Mimic is like 43, I believe, and they're going to hit you really hard. So even if you're walking in on 36, that's still a big difference. When we popped the Mimic earlier, I believe we were like 23 to 27, and it was still hitting us really hard. So just imagine the difficulty of a Mimic that far ahead. And I would say that's one of the number one killers. It's like someone checks the bronze chest, it's a Mimic, and they don't know what to do with it. Now, the previous floor, we did a Witching to kind of get through that. Having an opening Strength and Steel, which we are going to start with walking into the set, will also mitigate that. But it's something to be aware of walking in here, that there is a little bit of a difficulty spike, and you just want to give it a little bit of respect. Our Aether Pull is 6259. We haven't picked up too much Aether Pull pluses here, but that's expected, right? So that's okay. Floor is now red. The caves are now red. We're going to pop that Strength and Steel, especially because we are full on it. But even if you weren't full on it, I would highly recommend starting off this floor to get a Strength and Steel so that you can start bridging your level to what the enemies are here. We are going to continue killing in the hallways. This Drake is going to be Sight. It's going to do a Blaze Spike, Smoldering Scales, which gives them a kind of an ice fire spike type of shielding. But it's not a big deal. It's going to do a little bit of extra damage, but you're not too worried about it. Usually by the time it even gets it off, it's probably dead. The Puck here is going to be a Sight enemy, and it's just going to hit you regularly. It's probably going to, I believe it has an AoE too, but usually it's going to die. No problem here. Let us proceed the next floor. We are hugging the walls as much as possible, as always, especially because it's the cave floor. It is usually kind of treacherous to go for when you're not hugging, because some of these traps are a little bit weird. Adamantoise just does a very giant point blank, but it's really easy to get away from, especially on Machinist. They are slight aggro as well, and they are one of the higher level enemies here, just comparatively speaking, unless of course you get a Mimic. And we are now getting those levels. We're continuing to kill as much as we can as we go through the floors. Here you might start seeing me skip a couple enemies, but we definitely want to get to these chests that are there. Can you macro Pomanders? Not that I have known. I know lots of people have asked that question, and I have never found a way that it's been viable to do it within the game. So you cannot macro them. So for the keyboard mouse user, you would just be using your mouse to click it. For myself, who's on a full keyboard or a controller, you're kind of manipulating your UI just to get over there like this, and then menuing through to get to the Pomander that you want. It is something that you probably have to get used to, because you don't have to do that like anywhere else in the game, except maybe, arguably, like Eureka or Boja or something. Which Pomander tastes best? Well, you know, the history of Pomanders, like, you know what they actually are, right? I mean, a Pomander, theoretically, is not so much a taste, but a scent. And you are... I believe the actual history of a Pomander is that it is an item that you throw down. It creates this essence that you kind of absorb, and then you absorb that essence that gives you the inspiration or whatever it might be. Here we hit a Silence and an Amnesia trap here, as we were going through, but it is AoE to the enemies as well, so that means the enemies are also inflicted with the same thing. Now, we do have our high potions on our hotbar. We're going to be putting mega potions up here, because mega potions are the ones dropping. And again, you do want to use the potions that are dropping, because they are kind of the appropriate potion for this level set. You still don't want to use the highest ones, because you won't get the biggest benefit until you are a cap level. So definitely use the ones that are dropping. And this is very useful to note, especially again, if you're someone who's doing this for the first time and you don't have hyper potions, you don't have max potions. It's perfectly fine. You just use the potions that the game is giving you. No problem. Okay. So now we're getting Pice. These are sight as well. They will have a... Let me see. Are they going to do with their gaze first or their point blank? Oh, so that's a Petrify. And then they usually follow in the Body Slam kind of as a wombo combo. But it usually takes a while on these lower floors. You typically will see that wombo combo kicking in. Checking the chest. We have upgraded our armor. Sick. And again, like... Okay, we are on these lower floors. And we're still getting arm and armor pluses here. So that's why, like, you have 100 floors that you're climbing here to kind of level your arm and armor. It's not a terrible thing to, like, take advantage of it, you know? One thing that I have neglected to mention, which now I'll try to mention as much as I can, the spawn room does not have a trap. And you'll see us commonly use the spawn room as, like, our safe spot to pull enemies into. So, although we were using the hallways to avoid aggro, to avoid traps and kill things safely, you also want to pull things into the spawn room, because that is a safe space to be, because there are no traps here. Now, enemies can still spawn in the spawn room, but they cannot be a trap, so it's worth noting for that. And that'll be a little bit more... I cannot pull this. That is out of line of sight, and I cannot pull that. But the spawn room is going to be a lot more important on the higher floors than really the lower floors here. That thing was in the wall, and I was unable to hit that thing. Pomanders were used as Go Not Gently to offset foul odors and believed to protect against diseases in the old days. Nowadays, it's mostly related to aromatic substances. Yeah, it's almost like it is almost like you're kind of thought of like a PED kind of, right? Except in the form of a scent, in form of a smoke. So it is literally a PED. I'm gonna try to get this chest, but this is a donut room, so this is going to be a little bit trickier to get to. So to safely get this chest, we are going to clear out the enemies that are revolving around them. We're gonna kill this Animantoise, we're gonna kill that Animantoise, and then we will go get that chest. Again, we are fighting in the hallway to avoid any potential weirdness on traps. We're keeping it safe and cautious here. You are very welcome to go and walk over there to get that chest while fighting something, but if you hit a trap, you're increasing the risk of dying by that much, so it is safer to do it this way. Once you get more used to runs, you'll definitely, you know, try to run the risk of it, etc., but we're trying to get you through nice and safely, so we're playing the safe route here. Sight, perfect! So we're going to use our first sight since the first floor. That is a perfect example of me hitting a trap, carelessly, if you will, but that is a great example there that trap was in there. Even though we hit the sight, we still stepped on the trap. So you can see kind of a quick example of the traps that are on the floor. Of where they're located, so on and so forth. Some of them are going to be in the sides a little bit, but most of the time they are more in the middle. That's why you're hugging through the walls, so on and so forth. Alright, another big room, because we have 3 ways of going through here. More Animantoids, and now here's the Wyver. Now the Wyver on this floor, its proximity. In here, it's not as treacherous, because it is on the lower floor, but these are going to be some of the first ones on the higher floors that you will want to be worried about, because they are going to hit pretty hard. They don't have any telegraphs, they only do kind of double attacks, as we like to call them, because they do regular autos, plus a quick, non-casting auto attack, and those are going to be a little bit more deadlier. The Dualahan are sound, not too threatening here, but if you're walking past them, you might run into them, and like cause like an unintentional aggro because they're just walking around. They do make a really large, like big clanky sound, so you can probably hear them if you've got the sound up or if you're able to hear them. but you can hear them clanking. But they are a sound as we walk through them. We are RP walking. Again, checking on that symbol on the upper right corner to see that walking person symbol. And yeah, they're just doing their thing, no problem. But if I were to disengage the walk, we're supposed to get the aggro. LOL. Okay, there you go. There's the aggro. I don't know why these guys are like a little slow on that aggro here. What do the different debuffs sound like? Oh man, that's gonna be so hard. Like, I wonder if I can get a clip of it, like a sound effect clip of it, Ishi. There are like 3 different distinct sounds. Well, really it's 2 different distinct sounds, but it's hard to really explain it. But basically, blind and ability have a distinct sound to it when you hear it as you go through the next floor. While as everything else just has like a very generic sound to it when you go to it. Now, there's 2 things worth noting. I like to kind of give myself a guessing game when I go into the next floor, because the debuffs will load before your character loads. And so you can actually kind of understand, like, okay, am I getting 1 or 2 debuffs? Am I getting blind or ability? Of course, it's, again, hard to describe the sound. But what a couple of my Deep Dungeon buddies have done is they also kind of keep chat available. I think it's like battle chat or one of the chat histories available that will show you in the chat when you get the debuff. So that's one way to see it ahead of time if you want to do that as well. I don't do that, but some of my friends do that. Okay, we're clearing up this last floor here, keeping our level up. Now, one thing notably that you'll see kind of shift once we get to the higher floors is once we start hitting the 60 cap, we are going to be killing a lot less enemies. Because we don't need to kill anything for XP anymore. We don't need to maintain our XP. I'm going to be using an affluence because it's at 3. We don't need to maintain our experience climbing up, and we'll just be a little bit more quicker through the floors. We're doing this for the safety of levels and trying to stay a little bit ahead of the enemies to make life a little bit easier here. Especially when you're not running a... and that was the... It sounded like a whoosh sound is the sound that came in for the blind. Especially when you're not running a strength, but I'm sorry, we're not going to run a steel, but we're going to run a strength here. Because we have 3. But especially when you're not running a steel, staying a little bit ahead of the enemies are going to hit you less than if you were a lower level. So there's definitely a benefit to trying to keep your level respectably higher. Blind is indeed nasty. For certain jobs, it's a lot nastier than others. I'm actually gonna wait here. So 70% under. One fancy trick we can do here, which we didn't get to, is if the enemy was at least 70%, and then we open the chest, and then it explodes, we could kill the enemy from 70 to 0. Because again, silver chests do 70% of your HP. You just have to make sure that your HP is above 70%, otherwise you will actually die as well. Silver chests can kill you, landmines cannot kill you. We continue killing these animantories. We actually have to probably kill these 2, because they are looking to be guarding the exit. They are both sight enemies, so we could kind of get around them. But we'll kill them because we're still going for XP here. Again, we're still hugging the walls. The cave floors tend to be really risky with traps and everything. We're still killing in hallways too, just to make sure that we're pretty safe here. Gonna be checking the silver chests to see if we get an upgrade. They've been kind of slow on the lower floors, that's to be expected. But we still got away with 3, and that's pretty cool. Gonna kill this wyver. On the lower floors, you can actually hop these stones that you see here. These stones are actually not going to have traps. Later on the higher floors, which look like the cave floors, you can't hop on these stones like you can now. But on the lower floors, you can actually hop on top of them, and it's perfectly fine. You will actually not hit a trap on those, so there's a little bit of a safety play on that one. One thing worth noting, since we have a blind floor, I'll demonstrate this too, which is kind of nice to know. We have Pomanders that transform us into a succubus, into a manticore, later on into a Karibu or an angel. One thing worth noting on a blind floor, these transformations cannot miss on a blind floor. Something worth noting. Now, it's something you may not really utilize much on Machinist, but it's something that's interesting because if you get on a higher floor and you have blind, but you decide to rage it, you don't have to worry about missing because it will not miss, so it does bypass that blind debuff. So for some instances, it may be useful to you to use the Lust. And here's our first example of the Lust. What it does is that it gives a vulnerability down on the enemy up to 5 stacks. So each stack is 10% damage down for them. This is something that we like to use on bosses to kind of kill the bosses pretty fast. It is also a 90-second debuff for each application. So here you're not going to see it too much on the lower floors unless we have a luxury, and so on and so forth. Now, this also reminds me, so hopefully no one by now has asked this question, but we'll deal with it before. But since that was our first transformation, I do have a macro right here, which is my transformation macro, and it's something that's really going to be useful if you... This is actually even for keyboard mouse. For a transformation, usually you can click off the buff, so if you had a mouse, you would have the buff here, and you'd right-click it, and you can click it off. But what's a little bit better than that is that you can use something here. Where is it? Here. Status off Transfiguration. Here, I'll put it in chat since we have the live stream going in. Actually, I can't put it in chat because I don't have that, but I'll type it in. I'll type it in here manually. Status off Transfiguration, which is the command that you use to kick out your transformation on demand. Very, very useful because otherwise some people I've seen, they have no idea that you can take it off, and then boom, they're like, oh, I'm just gonna stay in here for like the full minute of the duration, and then they just die because they can't heal, because you can't heal while in transformation. But that's a really, really good macro to have if you want to get yourself quickly out of those transformations. It won't accept... Interesting, it won't. Well, that's interesting. Okay. That's funny. Okay. Status off Transfiguration without the question, without the quotations on controller. Nice. And also, the one thing I forgot to do here, so hopefully, again, no one really noticed, probably by the time, you know, maybe it doesn't matter. This used to be our Behemoth macro. I'm going to show you the macro here, what it looks like. We had a Behemoth macro that we utilized, Echo Target HPP, something that we used in previous expansions. It gave us, like, the percentage HP of an enemy into, like, the 10th of a percentage, which the game originally did not do, but nowadays the game does that now. So in Dawntrail, they added that feature in, so you can see right now the HP 18.8 didn't do that before, and that's why that macro existed, because it didn't do it before. So this macro, I actually can take off my hotbar now, which I wanted to do earlier, so we'll no longer use that macro. So if you're kind of transferring from the older guides into the newer guides, that macro is now gone. It'll be off my hotbar. So luckily we can just look at the enemy right now, and boom, we have our answer. Very, very big update for Deep Dungeon, in particular, Palace of the Dead. Because it was one extra spot on your hotbar to worry about. And now we don't have to do that anymore. You just do what everyone else is able to see. It's really nice. Yeah, rip the macro. It did do a fantastic job. I still remember the story of when we had someone in Discord come in. They're like, hey guys, did you know about the HPP macro, or the HPP command, which shows like the thing? And we're like, no, we didn't. And then it became such a big thing. I still remember when I did my first Machinist run, I didn't have that macro, so it was just basically me counting my GCDs. It's like, okay, we got it from 16%, it just dipped into 15, now I'm gonna count 4 GCDs, and then I'm gonna hold, because generally speaking, that's how much it took me to get a percentage in. We just had to guesstimate, we had no other way of doing it. But that command existed in the game for quite a while, because my understanding was they used it in hunts and stuff. So, yeah, it served us very well for all these years, but now, we don't need it anymore. Really nice. I mean, I like the quality of life for sure. Spriggan are going to be something that are a lot more annoying later. They are casters, but later they're going to shoot at AoEs at you, but at least for here, they're not too bad. They are slight. They do haste themselves, but they're usually dead by the time you have to really deal with them. Using the safety is really good because we can get through the rooms without too much of an issue here. A little bit delay there. Getting rid of the Wyvern, kiting it around. This is where our mitigation comes into play for Machinist here. Got the Minotaur. Now the Donut Room. One thing to note about the Donut Room, this is one of the best places to kite, because the enemies will have a lot of trouble trying to get around this kind of middle spot, and it's now viable because we did do the safety. The traps are like very tight in that room, so it's really tricky to do it if the traps were still there, but now that the traps are gone, really, really good room to kite something around. So here you're going to see an example of that. We're just going to run around this room, and it's going to be very difficult for it to kind of catch up to me, because it has to kind of travel a little extra around certain, like, features and whatever, instead of it just being like a straight line to you. We're going to definitely utilize quite a lot of that on the run, hopefully, if we run into it. But that's why the Donut Room you're going to hear a lot of, is very, very useful for cutting. Alright, we have another strength going. I'm gonna keep it popped. I'm gonna keep that strength at 2 so that we can keep the kill speed, and the kill might strong enough. Our level at 44 is not bad. The boss coming up is level 49, so we do want to be roughly close to that boss if we can help it. Skatine! These are some of our community members' favorite enemies. These are sound, but they are very annoying to deal with because they do basically a sleep on you, and there's very little room to kind of line of sight it. It is a 15-second sleep, so it's just a lot better to let it catch up to you, wait for it to hit you and wake you up, and then pop it in. They tend to have a tendency of missing, and you can actually dodge their attacks, which is really dumb. But the Skatine are very annoying, so you know, maybe you want to actually just skip them altogether because they are sound and you don't have to necessarily fight them. The effigy here have a very long conal, but they're very easy to kill usually. They are slight aggro, so they're really good to kill. Nothing too special again, because they're on lower floors. We got the Spriggans and a Centaur. The Centaur here usually will berserk themselves, followed by a point-blank AoE. They usually take quite a long time to kind of do their thing. They're not terrible, but they are proximity. So if they are in your way, like going to the room, you do have to fight them because of that proximity aggro. So we are killing them here. Another Spriggan here while we check the room. There's nothing here, so we're going to proceed to the next one after this one. In melee range, Skatine will slap you awake immediately after sleeping you, if they don't miss. I've had situations where the Skatine literally will miss like 3 times in a row. The most frustrating thing ever. It makes no sense why they would just miss, but for some reason it just happens. But it's actually funny if you have other enemies on top of you, because it'll have a higher chance for you to get kicked out of sleep, so there is that too. Okay, we use the site here. Here's another opportunity to see kind of where the traps are going to be located on a floor. Again, this is the spawn room, so you're not going to see traps here. And it's going to kind of secure another reason why we hug the walls here. So here's another trap right here. If you were to dive into the middle of this room, you are going to get caught with that trap. So again, hence why we kind of hug the walls here. These Merilith are proximity. They do a lot of casting. HP is getting a tiny bit low, so we're using that Mega Potion that we just put on our bar at the beginning of the floor. Centaur here. They are beefier. We are 45. They are 47. That's why they're dying just a little bit slower. That's where that level discrepancy is coming in. That's why, again, I recommend kind of killing a little extra so that your level is just a little bit higher. Here's an example that we can show off here. I will take a hit here. I'm going to hit the landmine. You're going to see it affect the enemy here. But it affects both of us, so you want to be careful. There can be strats that utilize something that we like to call landmine strats. Can offer a quick kill, but it is a risky play to do. But it is an example that I can display so you know that it is something that exists. There are going to be strats that can be involved by using that. I would say for Machinist, it's a lot less likely because it's kind of unnecessary. You're going to see a lot more of that with a healer and a tank run in particular. But, there can be situations if you're kind of thinking creatively about how to use it for, you know, those situations. But it is my recommendation that you're probably not going to really take advantage of it, unlike some other things that you can do. Using that Mega Potion to heal us, still staying away from the sustaining potions. We started the run today with 20, and I will be using as little as I can, especially on the first kind of 50-ish floors, 70-ish floors, by the time we get our first posture guarantee on 50. I got a chest here, I'm gonna go back and get it. I'm gonna fight this thing as well. Kiting and running, got another Serenity, which is useful in terms of erasing debuffs on the floor. Alright, Peloton. Peloton, very useful for keeping the movement speed going. Aside from Sprint, of course, but Peloton is something that you will be looking to spam quite often. This thing was guarding the exit. Here, I'm going to open this chest while we're fighting to see if it explodes. It does not, but that's perfectly okay. You'll see me do that quite a lot. Nothing And that is something I'll do even if my armor is actually capped, because you could get that quick kill. Something that you can try to practice on the lower floors where you get that enemy below 70%, pop the silver chest in combat. It's a little extra strategy, something that you don't have to technically do and you don't have to put into your thoughts of strategy, but very useful. Here we don't have items, and one thing that's noticeable about the no items is we can use only one Pom, which is Serenity, to erase that. It's something that is a little bit of a threatening debuff that you can get onto these floors, especially on the higher floors, because this means you cannot use your sustaining potions, nor can you use your regular potions. So you see on my hotbar, sustaining and the mega potions are unable to be pressed here. But here on Machinist, this is where the kiting really comes into play as kind of its big use. Again, if you're running away from the enemy, you're doing damage, and you're not getting hit, you don't need to heal, right? That's its biggest form of mitigation. So this is where kind of the kiting of Machinist will be paramount to kind of get used to and to take advantage of. Because then something like a no items can be trivial because you're not getting hit to begin with. You're killing the enemies before they get to you. That's what's really useful to that. So as you see, we're kind of pulling and bringing you back to spawn room, because this is the safer spot. There's no trap in the spawn room. So this is something you'll see on the higher floors, but I'm taking this a little bit more carefully because of the fact that I cannot heal outside of my second wind. So we're taking care of these 15s as we go through. You've seen most of the enemies on these floors already. I'm going to pull this Merilith first before I proceed to the next floor. I don't want to hit a trap while I'm walking into this room. Again, that's kind of preventing disaster from happening, particularly because we don't have the items going. So I'm going to kill this first, and then we proceed to the next room. So now if I hit a trap, it's fine. Now if I hit a luring trap, I may want to consider a Serenity first to get to a witching, because it could be a little bit treacherous. So that's a two-step process, something to be worried about. But for now, we're still okay. I will get this chest, and then we will proceed to the next. Again, I'm going to kill this first. And then we go check the chest, hugging the wall as carefully as possible. Is using a Serenity to use a Strength or Steel to prevent overcap them worth it? Depends on the floor. On the higher floors, there definitely can be a value to it. Now, Serenity is something that I will value at probably your most valuable Pomander. Now, something that I would be willing to risk for stakes is that if you had a Strength and a Steel on a no-item floor, on the higher floors, and you're sitting at 3 Serenity, I may be willing to use the Serenity to use that Strength and Steel. Because you're getting like 2 buffs out of it, right? If you only had a Strength or a Steel, I may not consider it, because it also comes down to what you're capable of handling on the floor set. Example, floor 61+. I won't really... Oh, we caused the problem. I guess I can just chat for now. I killed it as the sleep goes in, so now I have to wait till it is debuff. Floor 161+. I can get through that entire floor without Steel. And so the priority of me actually needing Steel is not that fantastic, as opposed to, let's say, 181+, where things hit a lot harder, and I may consider the usefulness of a Steel. Now, the only exception that can come into play is if you were on the 9th floor, let's say 169, 179, it is a no-item floor, and you're about to get into the boss. In this case, you are basically destined to use the Strength and Steel for the boss because it is nearly required. That might be worthy of putting your Serenity down to 2 to be able to open that Strength and or Steel, if that makes sense. Like, that's situational. But I will not be willing to drop my Serenity to 1. 1 Serenity is very, very dangerous, and you really want to try your best to work through as many debuffs as possible to mitigate the usage of Serenity. That might be one of the biggest things we'll do on this tutorial on the higher floors, is how much we'll fight through to make sure that we don't run out of Serenity, because you can create a lose condition by having no Serenity at all, because you just cannot get that off that floor because the game gave you a really crappy debuff. So that's why you want to fight through as much as you can and really save it for just the most tragic of debuffs that the game gives you. So here we're on the 9th floor. What we will do here is we will pop a Strength and we will pop a Steel, because we are going to get into the boss floor coming up here. and it should hopefully carry into the boss. We shouldn't take too long on this 9th floor. The previous set, we used it on the 8th floor, and then we ran into a treasure room, so that caused like a lot of time loss, if you will, on the debuff, so we would have potentially ran out if we kind of stayed on the floor. In this instance, we're going to use it now because we should be able to get off no problem. Does a second alteration reshuffle whatever changed after the first alteration? Really good question. I don't think we have any way of actually parsing that, because you'd have to know what the first one is before you walk into the second floor, and I'm pretty sure the floors load whatever the floor has the moment you get into it, not beforehand, if that makes sense. So it wouldn't... It's like, I don't want to necessarily say no, it's just there's no way for us to actually, like, give evidence that that's actually true, if that makes sense. Okay, we got a Mimic on this one, which is perfectly fine. Now look at our level disparity here. We are 49, which is the level of the boss, and this is 43. Now this might be the first instance we use Head Graze, one of the abilities that Machinist has. Actually, I'm gonna wait for it. This thing is gonna do Infatuation. Head Graze is an interrupt. You'll see this little squiggly lines on Infatuation. That means it's something that can be interrupted, and it's one of the reasons why Machinist is a very good job to take in, because you can do this entire run and never see Pox that the Mimics get that give you from Infatuation. Just ran into a landmine. I'm gonna heal up a little bit first before we do our pull. So that's one thing that gives you a massive benefit on this job, is that you don't have to deal with this nasty debuff that a Pox gives, which is damage down, auto heal disable, and it's a 10-minute debuff that really, really sucks. So, and it also gives you a passive DOT on you by leaving that Pox on. One of the biggest things that, if you go like a melee who doesn't have an interrupt, a healer who doesn't have an interrupt, a caster who doesn't have an interrupt, one of the reasons you may not go for those classes because you don't have the ability to stop the thingy. Now here we'll do our first instance of a lust to kind of help us kill this boss. Also, we are not going to use any sustaining potions here, so we'll stay with the mega potion that we have. And we are equal level, 49 to 49 here, so you'll see the damage that we take in, but we can still survive the boss because of our buffs, etc. The lust will definitely help kill here. Now, here, I'm going to do something a little bit more that I don't typically do, but it will be very common for you to go for. We were talking about our transformation macro on this boss, which I'll showcase again, just in case you didn't see it on between the floors. Transformation macro, statusoff Transfiguration. Or as we had Ethana mentioned that you can't have the quotations if you're on console, I believe, right? Just for whatever reason. Or in controller. Actually, I think he said controller. But this is what kicks us out of the transformation if we hit that button. Now, more traditionally, which I'll demonstrate, is using a mouse to kick you off. But our goal here is that we're going to lust here. Again, no sustaining potion used here. We're going to get 5 stacks because 5 is the max. I'll hit 6 so you can see the difference here. Every time we hit this buff here, it's going to refresh the timer, which is 90 seconds. You'll see an icon at the bottom of my HP, which is like the transformation icon that we have. We're going to get to 4 stacks here. We're going to get to 5 stacks here. We're going to hit 1 more, and you'll see it doesn't go above 5. Traditionally, you'll right-click this buff, which is what you can do to get this thing off, which is, again, probably 90% of users with using a keyboard mouse. The transformation macro will be something that I definitely highly recommend, because you can at least not have this thing of like accidentally clicking off something accidentally, because you can click off your strength and you can click off your steel. So definitely something to note. Now this boss in particular is probably the second hardest boss that you're going to run in, if not one of the harder ones. Notice the damage that it is outputting on me without a sustaining potion. It is quite a bit, and this is one reason why all of our work on the previous floors to keep our level kind of reasonable and equal to the boss, it comes down to this. Because of if we are a lower level than the boss, let's say 48, 47, this thing is just going to be hitting us a lot harder than it currently is. So we have to rotate our heals. Again, this is kind of assuming you may not have any sustaining potions, or you're being very conservative about your sustaining potions. I do have 20, in the assumption that you have at least 1 potcher, but sustaining potions are going to be pretty rare on the earlier floors, so if you can get through without using them, here you go, this is a demonstration of it. But also, again, the mileage will vary. If your level is a little bit lower than mine, you may need to give this a little bit more care than what I did. Or if you happen to have a sustaining potion, you could perhaps use it here to keep the fight a little bit more easier, so you don't have to worry about the HP. But that is definitely one of the harder bosses to deal with on the lower floors. 62-61 arm and armor. We're good to go on floor 30. Step into 31. 31 is probably going to be the last floor that we're actually going to kind of overkill, if you will. Check a lot of the rooms and kill as much as we can, because we are getting closer to level 60. Once we get to level 60, then you're going to start to see us really start shaving down on the kill count and kind of just going through the floors and just going a lot faster. But we still want to be a respectable level going into the boss, which is a 59 level boss. The floors are going to come away from the cave floors, be a little bit more like a dungeony feel, but you're still worried about kind of the certain traps that could be along the walls, so on and so forth. So we're still going to be playing careful about killing things in hallways, so on and so forth. That's what we got on the next couple of floors. So let's hop on in, 31 to 34. Worth noting here, especially because we are opening silver chests, 31 to 40 silver chests can be mimics here. So we do have to be careful about that. Now, bronze chests will no longer be mimics for the rest of the run. It is only going to be silver chests until the next set, which will be gold chests. Now, the heck dies and the boogie, which is perfect. I hit that landmine right out of that wall. What a good example right there. We're going to pop a strength here, as we usually do, and a steel as well as the opener. Boogies are sound aggro. Not too special over here. The heck dies, believe it or not, are also sound, even though they are 10 eyes. Trust, they don't see me, so there's one of the funniest enemies here in terms of Deep Dungeon. But they are sound aggro. The ogres up there are sight aggro. Not too deadly as well, but I believe they have a very large AoE coming at you when you pull them. And a lot of these AoEs are not going to be too deadly here. We're going to play this risk. We're going to play this very carefully here. Pull it in. There's that big AoE. Now, one thing that is very worthy to note, guys, be very careful to not pull an enemy with Ricochet. Ricochet is AoE, and if you accidentally Ricochet with an enemy next to it, you will pull it by accident, and now you have to deal with 2 enemies, not just 1. So definitely advisable to hold on to that Ricochet until it is safe in the hallway or it is permanently separated from the enemies, and then you can pop your Ricochet. Gauze Barrel right now is perfectly fine. From what I understand, the higher level Gauze Barrel is AoE, but still the lower one should still be normal. We just hit an enfeebling trap, which is basically like a damage down and a defense down debuff on us. It is a single target, so it doesn't do an AoE effect, it only affects us. So the traps here, we've hit 2 already, and we've been pretty good in dodging traps on the previous set, but even with kind of hugging the wall, you're still kind of potentially getting traps. And there's that Ricochet example that I just showed you, that you had to be a little bit careful about using it, because the enemy didn't separate from the ogre, they came with me. So it's something to note. I mean, with the lower level enemies, it's like not that bad, but if you do it on the higher floors, it can be really, really treacherous. You do want to be careful about the potential of using a Ricochet on pulling. Highly advised not to Ricochet on a pull. Ricochet ended your last run. I had a story one time from a person that it was their friend. They were on 151 plus in like 157 or something. There was a soul flare in the middle of the room. Solo. No, like, it was just by itself, boom. They decided to pull with Ricochet, because I guess that was what the cooldown was up. But the moment they hit the button... Ooh, we have a treasure room here. The moment they hit the button, another soul flare spawned, and they pulled both of them, and then they panicked. So, rip. Now here's a good example of what you can do here. We have a lot of enemies that are on this floor. Something that you can utilize, especially on the higher floors, it's something that you can get into the habit. If you have a lot of enemies, it's worth getting a lot of these kills and using a fortune. The more chances of kills, the more likely a fortune could drop a chest from these enemies. Here we're going to utilize our rage. Even though we only have 1 rage, we're not really going to need it until much later into the run. So we're going to also pop a safety so that we can avoid hitting a trap here just to make sure. And we're going to pop a rage and get a lot of these kills. This is also because we're still looking for a level up. This is going to help us get our XP a little bit higher than what it is currently. So So this is like a nice way to kind of get some extra kills, maybe get some extra chests. This is something that you'll see maybe on the higher floors to get off of a room, especially if you run into a treasure room, and we're taking advantage of this for resource obtaining, to get this resource in. And again, the fortune, I tend to be a little bit conservative on fortunes. It may be a really good habit to consider using a fortune, if you're sitting at 3, to just keep it at 2 like I am with affluences, just to, you know, maybe you get an extra chest here and there. It is what it is. But I tend to be a little too conservative with my potions personally. So just keep that in mind, that you may get a big benefit. Look at the chests that have dropped. Like, this is RNG. Sometimes they drop, sometimes they don't. But if you do get lucky, you could get a lot of power-ups here. And looks like we might get some decent ones. Intuitions, Serenity, Safety came back, which we just used. Another Safety, a Steel, very good. And a Lust, to get the Lust back, so that was a pretty good yield. Didn't get the Rage back, but I'm not worried about the Rage. It's like the least of our concerns. We're only gonna really need that till like the much later floors, so. Going into 32. Alright, no sprint here. Kind of an annoying debuff, but what can you do? At least you do have Peloton, an advantage of Machinist going in. Traveling through the floors here, we have more Heck Dice. We're just going to kill them off. Big damage on the Heck Dice as much as we can. Now the Succubus here are patrols. They will, like all the Succubuses you will encounter will basically do the same thing. They're going to open with Dark Mist, which is a point-blank AoE. That will give you a Terror, I believe, or a Hysteria, so you definitely don't want to get into this one. Now, the one follow-up after this is going to be their Fire, the Void Fire, which you can interrupt, but I actually recommend you to not interrupt it. Let it go in, just run away from it, let it finish the cast, and boom, you're good. It'll be good. It'll be a good way to kind of keep them stunned and stop while they're just hard casting something. But you do want to watch out for them. They are sight aggro, so something that is worth noting, especially if you see them floating around. You can kind of just like, you know, hide behind around a corner and then just avoid them that way. Alright, hugging the walls, checking these chests as we go along. The bronze chest, if I have not mentioned yet, which I believe I have not, they are the source of getting potsherds. So there is a benefit to opening those bronze chests. Now, on the lower floors, sub 100, the chances of you getting a potsherd from a bronze chest is very low. Do not be surprised if you go through 100 floors and you see like one, if not any. And that's not even including the guarantee that you get from floor 50 and 100. But it's still worth opening. Like, you could potentially get potsherds from bronze chests. The later in the floors you are, I believe, in terms of the mechanics of Deep Dungeon, on the lower floors, you can only get potsherds, I believe, starting from floor 4 on the 4th floor, not 1 to 3. But that's more the lower floors. But you see a bronze chest, just open it up, and you can potentially get a potsherd. That will change when you get to the higher floors, and you can get a potsherd from any chest whatsoever. But there are these like weird restrictions in Deep Dungeon in particular, where a certain thing starts up on a certain floor. A weird one that is something that we know about the scoring runs that some people pay attention to. What they consider the story floors. So for Palace of the Dead, that's 1 to 100. Those are the story floors. You cannot see a Luring Trap. Excuse me. You cannot see a Luring Trap from floor 1 to 3. Luring Traps start at floor 4 for 1 to 100. Which is worthy to know. I mean, something that's important for people going for story. I mean, this is almost like the category of, like, you know, useless information for someone just caring about their clear. But at least for the first 3 floors, you're not going to be too concerned about stepping on a Luring Trap. You'll hit traps, just not a Luring Trap in particular. Now that changes once you get into the harder floors, 101 plus, so on and so forth. But, yeah, those are like there's like so many little details that Deep Dungeon has that is very interesting, that can be useful to you, that may not be as useful to you as someone else, so on and so forth. You got like 7 potsherds in my 151 to 160 set. Yeah, and I've gotten like almost like 4 to 7 on 101 to 110. So it is one thing that I do recommend when you actually go through potsherd farming, that you may want to do it at 101 plus. But we're also going to demonstrate on this run in this tutorial that you don't even have to start with a lot. We are only starting with none. We actually started with one potsherd, and we put everything else off into our saddlebag just for demonstration purposes. So we only have 20 potions at the moment for this entire run. But you'll see, we'll be perfectly fine when we continue climbing, so on and so forth. And we're gonna do like a mix of the strength of Machinist as we climb up to mitigate the usage of these potsherds. And to also, again, my whole thing here was to kind of like showcase a lower entry into the content, because all of the other guides that I've done before, we always had like a slew of potions. Like maybe I was sitting at like full 999 potions, and then we had 99.99 on our armor. And we've had like one or two people kind of say, oh, you know, what about the starting person? You know, what if I don't have this? What if I don't have that? And it's a completely fair question. So now we've brought the entry down to 59.59, which is around what I would say is a good place to start. You may want to be a little bit higher or a little bit lower. And then we're going with a really low stack of potsherds, aka the sustaining potions. So that we can also make it look like, okay, you actually don't need that much to start with, you know? And especially nowadays, one thing that is different from the previous guide into Dawntrail is that when I made the previous guide, the sustaining potions were still a 15-second cooldown with a 15-second duration. Now, when Eureka Orthos came out in 6.35, they, actually more specifically 6.3, they increased the duration of the sustaining potions from 15 to 30. Which is, in essence, it means, you know, you can use 2 times less the amount of potions that you have. Now, the cooldown is still 15 seconds, so if you got used to that 15-second cooldown, you still might be finding yourself spamming it every 15 seconds, so you're technically not actually saving any potsherds. But still, the 30-second duration has had a lot of benefits, and for all intents and purposes, you are using less than you used to before. So that's one reason why you can start with a lower starting kit for your runs in particular. And again, we are starting with 20 as a little bit of a demonstration of like, yeah, you don't need that much, you know? As we get through the chests and as we get through the floors, we will try to pick them up, and you'll see that it's like, oh yeah, actually, not too bad. Here's our first instance of an alteration that I will use. Alteration, what it does, description of the Pomander, changes the enemy occupying the random room on the next floor into mimics or a mandragora. Now, the mimics are of course the ones that are always the treacherous ones that everyone is afraid of, but the Mandies, or the Corrigans that a lot of us will call it, are very cool, because those are guys that will die in one shot, one ability, and they are free kills, and sometimes it can help you on the higher floors to get off of the floor a lot quicker, because they are kills that they are just one shot, so you're just killing so much faster. It is a dice roll, because if you end up with mimics, then you have to deal with the mimics. The mimics and pals that do have a much higher aggro range than any of the 3 deep dungeons, so generally speaking, if they are somewhere in the middle of the room, you're probably not getting around them unless you either skip the room altogether, or use something else like a rage to get rid of them. So it is worth noting on that front too. The mummies here are proximity. You're gonna see them quite a bit. You're gonna see them in like 4 different sets. You're gonna see them now at 34. You're gonna see them over at 91 plus. You're gonna see them on 131 plus, and then you're gonna see them again at 191 plus. They're gonna do the same exact thing no matter where you see them. Just like a quick tonal in front of you, rotting bandages. If you get hit with that, you're gonna get stunned and some average damage, but the stun is very long. It's like a 5-second stun, so it's a little bit nasty, especially if you're trying to dodge other enemies floating around. Alright, we got enough kills. The floor is safety. We're gonna proceed to 35 coming up, making some pretty good time here. We're getting closer to the point where we don't have to kill as much, because our levels are pretty good. Again, the reason why you're killing, or why I'm demonstrating that you're killing a lot, is just to keep your levels pretty respectable. Something I do recommend for newer runners as you go through, especially if you're looking at your first time. Just so you can feel not as intimidated by enemies being a much higher level than yourself, or the bosses being a much higher level than yourself. Get rid of this mummy going into 35. Palms are pretty good. We're starting to load out with the palms. We're only really using a lot of them if we cap out, and you're starting to see everything loading up. Worth noting that the raising and the resolution, palms you see later on in the later floors, they don't show up until 51 and 61 respectively, so you will not pick up a raising until you get into floor 51 at all. So you're gonna see those palms empty for a little bit, up until we start getting to those higher sets. So, but here we can still get a rage, which is one thing that we are currently missing, which is perfectly fine because we used it on that treasure room. That was pretty useful, I would say. Ogres are still here. Again, slight aggro on the ogres. Kind of being a little less on the killing here because of the gloom floor. Things are going to die a little slower, so I may not necessarily kill as much here, just because it'll take a little bit longer. I am going to try to work towards the chests, though, to get to the chests that are available. I'm going to kill this first because of this donut room. Alternatively, I could sight or safety, but yeah, we'll play a little conservative here. We'll hug the wall here, see if we can get out without too much issue. Now, one thing I do like to do on Machinist, which is worth noting. So think of it like a, think of this like just a pathing that I've already drawn in. Because I've already walked this path about hugging this wall and we didn't hit a trap, I'm perfectly okay dragging this thing with me. Because I know as long as I walk the same path along the wall, I will not hit a trap. Now, there could be one off the wall, like one step off the wall, which could be, you know, annoying if anything else. It's like, I just walked here, and I didn't hit a trap the first time. Possible, but it's not like the traps move as you're walking through. They are in set positions, so that's one safe way to pull an enemy through a room, is if you've already walked through the room, if that makes sense. Something definitely to consider when you're trying to save time, move around, kite things, so on and so forth. Pulling this. Alright, we have we got the mimics in this room. Nicely done. Okay, so we're gonna pull one of them. One thing that's very interesting to note about the mimics, whenever you do an alteration in a room, and I was describing to you guys earlier how, depending on the floor set, they are going to be coming from a very specific type of chest. The 1 to 30 was going to be bronze chests. This floor only is from silver chests. If you do an alteration, and they are mimics, they will all be of this chest that they are supposed to be mimics from. So if you see this mimic right here, and the one I just killed, they are from the silver/blue chests. So that tells you, oh, they all come from silver chests. Never will you see mimics be of different colored chests. They are always going to be of the chests that they spawn from. So something to note, if you're unsure about like, okay, where do they come from, and you do an alteration, that's kind of the answer that you tell you. But for this set in particular, it is coming from silver chests. And you can tell again, because this is actually a silver chest. Starting on the next floor, 41 plus, they will all come from gold chests, and that will not change for the rest of Deep Dungeon. From 41 to 200, it is all from gold chests that you can get mimics from. And that means that silver chests and bronze chests are going to be clear from mimics. You will never see a mimic from a bronze chest or a silver chest starting at 41. I would say that used to be a definite misconception early on in Deep Dungeon, that people were avoiding chests of all colors because they thought that a mimic could show up at any point. And I remember that early in the day too, like you were just kind of like, ah, oh, mimic can be anywhere, and then you got this little bit of intel of like, no, it's only from a specific chest on this set, and it really opened the door to like, oh, okay, oh, I can just open these chests without a problem, and you know, this is just a mechanic for Deep Dungeon, that is just a thing. So it's definitely worth knowing, because man, is it going to be terrifying to look at, oh, we got a pot shirt here too. So that's our first pot shirt, by the way. And that's why it's useful to open bronze chests. It would be a terrifying feeling where like you think every single chest on the floor, bronze, silver, and gold, can be mimics. It's like there's a lot of paranoia that you're gonna have to start to cut through, but luckily we know for a fact that they only come from one type of chest. Do mimics always drop the same colored chest, or do they drop any chests? Really good question, Darth. That was just coincidence, happenstance, that silver chest dropped another silver chest. They can drop any chest RNG-wise. I would like to think something like DD Compendia might have something like that, statistically, about what they could possibly spawn, but I would just like to think that it's like just an even 30-30, like, split between the three. Boom, 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 boom. Did I safety here? I did safety here. Okay. This Troubadour, by the way, let me just showcase this Troubadour. One of the easiest enemies available. They do a cast of Dark, and because it's a hard cast, you can actually kind of You can kind of deal with their casting by going in a certain pacing, and you could totally not take damage. It's a little unfortunate that this guy only shows up. The latest floor they show up is 131. They will never show up after that, but they are like really easy enemies to deal with. So those are fun. Those are kind of fun to fight if you want to kind of do that kind of movement. The Aramon here are going to do... They're not going to do their Petrify here, but they are going to do like a raid-wide AoE-ish, but you can line of sight it. It's called Eyes on Me, one of their old moves that they used to have historically. I'm actually going to wait for it to get off here. It doesn't do that much damage. It just exploded. It doesn't do that much damage, but it is a raid-wide, so you do want to watch out for that. Alright, we're going to start to kind of go through these floors a little bit quicker because we're starting to get close to cap here. This is the Troubadour. The Monk coming out is going to be a proximity enemy. It has a move called Sucker, which pulls you in. No, knockback disable will help you out, so I'm going to let this thing go through, do its thing. If we arms length, we won't get pulled in here, and it will follow in with a point blank AoE. This one in particular, on its own, is not deadly, but it can be a little tricky if you're trying to run away from it, because it could actually pull you from a really long distance, and it could pull you through traps and stuff. So one thing to be careful with monks, and try not to deal with multiple of them if you can. Okay, ability down means we can use Peloton, but that's perfectly fine. The Hawk here is not too bad. They will do a conal. I believe they do have their tail swipe, but the likelihood of you actually activating tail swipe in a solo instance is pretty tough. They are going to be a lot worse later, but they're pretty tame on the lower floors here. They are side aggro. Gorbon here is a patrol. It is proximity. It doesn't do much except for a double attack called Beatdown. They are going to be a little deadlier later on the floors, and they pretty much do the same thing later on the floors. There's that beatdown, by the way. Now, this is an interesting one. I don't know if these lower level Gormon do it, but the Gormon, 100 floors later, they actually have a mechanic that exists only if you're in a party, which I believe is their pull-in mechanic. And I think it follows up with something else, but you'll only see it in a party, but not solo. So in a solo, you only see the beatdown, and that's about it. There's like only like a handful of enemies that will actually have party mechanics, which is very interesting. Something that you don't see in the other deep dungeons. But, and you don't have to worry about, but it's like a little, like, you know, little extra bits of info. This, Hagenti isn't too bad either. It's very similar to a Gubu in terms of damage output. It just does like a little bit of a double attack. They are side aggro as well, but the Gubu are proximity, so worthy to note there. This Gubu's gonna come back because it is a patrol. Alright. I'm gonna pull the Gubu, because I want to get that chest, the gold chest over there. We do still have our Mega Potion here. I believe X Potions are dropping, so I could change my potion here to an X Potion. I just want to see what the drop is, just to make sure. We're not getting any drops at the moment, so I'll just wait for the next enemy to drop something. Here we can do our little dodging here, so we can mitigate some damage, because we don't have too much healing right now. Okay. Checking the chests. Alteration. We'll use the Alteration again. Now, you could go through a lot of this run without even bothering with Alteration. There are going to be strategic times to use it, especially on the higher floors. But on the lower floors, like, if you just don't want to deal with the extra gambling, you really don't have to. It does give extra points if you kill the enemies that are transformed into either Mimics or Korgans. But it is something worth noting that on a climb up, especially on a fresh climb, it isn't something that you necessarily have to do up until, again, the higher floors, which we'll talk about later. Alterations are decent XP, but I would say in this floor, like 31 plus, it's not going to be as big as it is on the lower floors. That was actually something that I was thinking about talking about on the lower floors to consider an alteration, but I think it would just be better just to kind of avoid it altogether, and we just didn't mention it, only because it could cause a lot of complications, because mimics can be a little tricky on the lower floors. Oh, I don't have an ooh, I can't, so I cannot stop that Pox because I don't have abilities right now. So we had to let that go through, which does give me an opportunity to talk about what the Pox actually is doing to me and why it's pretty bad. First, you can see a 9-minute debuff on my debuff bar next to that ability thing. That is a 9-minute debuff that we have on us. Hold on. This thing is actually causing a little bit of issues. I will not die to Gubu. Okay, so this thing here causing damage over time, HP regeneration is down, and our damage is reduced. It is a nasty debuff that exists. That's why having a job like Machinist is so good, because you can get away most of the time interrupting the Pox, but in this instance, because I don't have abilities, I cannot interrupt it. Now, the way around that is we use a Purity. A Purity will erase Pox, which is basically its only existence is to do that one thing, but that's how detrimental that debuff is, because of Mimics existing. So that is your way out if that were to happen. We've seen most of the enemies here. Gonna be using another here. We do have X potions, which I'll use. I'll put back on my hotbar. So I've been putting the potions that drop onto my hotbar just for demonstration purposes. It is better to use the potions that are dropping on the floor as opposed to using the highest level, because they do have typically a lower cooldown and they are going to give you a little bit more HP because of their percentages, etc. It isn't until you get to 41 or you get to 51 that you want to start using, say, Max Potion or Hyper Potion, so on and so forth. Another Mimic. So here, I'm actually going to be using a Witching. A Witching, as we described, changes this into a Frog, Imp, or Toad. We got the Toad here. But one of the big uses here is that because it turned into a Toad, it doesn't have an opportunity to get the Infatuation off. So this actually prevents me from getting Pox right now, because I can kill this within the 30 seconds. A strategy I like to utilize as a melee, as a job that doesn't have an interrupt, but it isn't necessary for a Machinist to do it, even on the higher floors. Mimics are actually not that bad on Machinist. But in this instance, since I don't have abilities, we're using it, so on and so forth. Using that Affluence because we have 3, just getting it out of the way. That sound, whoosh, that sound is either blind or abilities. I can identify that, so there we go, it's blind. Someone was asking that earlier about how do I know about the sound. It's hard to explain a sound, you just have to hear a sound. It's a little extra, you know, knowledge, game knowledge, if you will, about that. We do have our drill now, so now we do have the big load of damage that Machinist will show. And one of the biggest cases why Machinist is kind of a very popular job is because of Reassemble Drill as well as Wildfire. So now you're going to start to see enemies really melt even without Strength on. So this is why this job is very appealing. It has good mobility, or really good, like the best mobility. Mobile damage on the run without any damage loss, as well as that Reassemble Drill. Even Drill on its own is very satisfying to use, but very strong on enemies, so on and so forth. You'll just see a lot of things just melt when you do a drill, and a Reassemble Drill. It sounds so good too. Our level's pretty good. As mentioned earlier, the boss is 59, and we are currently 58. Not that it matters. I would say this boss, amongst the other 2 that we dealt with, which was the Hydra and the Refalcia on floor 20, this is the least of your concerns to be closer to this level. Now, if you are riding without sustaining potions, it's probably ideal to be closer to it, but you will typically kill the boss pretty fast the higher level you are, which is really nice. Machinist is very strong, so it will take care of those bosses a lot better than a lot of other jobs. It is also recommended to utilize a Lust for the boss, just to kill it a little bit faster, and you'll see, we'll try to do like a semi-quick kill on the boss, due to having the Lust. You have Korrigans here, which is fantastic, so it's going to be free kills as well as free XP on this one. Now, this is our first instance of these Mandies. One thing to note, I'm going to demonstrate it here, actually. I'm going to come over here just so you guys can see something. If you see on the enemy HP bar, you see like the Dorito symbol, that indicates that they are enemies that can be aggressive, so they have an aggro of something, whether it be sight, proximity, or sound. Now the Korrigans, or the Pygmeor, I believe how you properly say that, they don't have that symbol, so these guys do not aggro if you walk up to them. Now, if you do any type of action, it doesn't have to be damage, so I'm gonna hit my leg Graze here. I actually did do damage, but anyway, any action on them will one-shot them and kill them. So they're easy kills, and they do count towards the exit. Now, if you are point blank to them and you kill them, they will do a little bit of a stun to you with a little bit of damage. So it's something that like is a very niche issue. Like the stun doesn't even last that long, but it does do something when you kill them. So that's what it does when it's close by. It doesn't do much damage. But since you're a range class, you may as well just kill them from afar so you don't cause any weird issues, you know what I'm saying? Okay, stepping into 38, one before the boss. Here, I'm going to pop a strength because we are on the 9th floor and we'll carry it into the boss. This boss is, again, not as treacherous as the first as 20 and 30, but we will give it some respect because it does have ad phases and so on and so forth. Let's pop the strength. We're going to see things really melt because we have strength on. And this is going to be the appeal of Machinist showing even more and more. Damage can be very useful. Psych going out so we can see the floor, which is great. Oh, by the way, here it is. Look at this trap over here. If I'm hugging the wall here, that's where it's like 85%, 90% that you can do it. You can dodge traps, but it is not 100%. At least you're giving yourself a higher chance of victory, not a perfect chance of victory. So something to note about those donut rooms. Only my damage here just because I want to save it for the boss. Actually, the exit's in the opposite direction, so I'll go over there. Got my witching back stick. 2 Goobus coming over here. Or 3? 2. Kill them both. My HP is a little bit low here, but that's perfectly fine. Okay, going to the exit. We've seen everything, we kind of talked about all the enemies, so we are good to go here on the checklist. Dead Monk, that is a landmine as well. Ah, fresh steel going to the floor, love it. So here's our first example of the damage that Machinist can offer. Let me get to the boss first, then we'll talk about it. The 40 boss is a giant ghost. And it will have a unique strategy going into this 100 floors from now. But basically what this ghost will do is it'll do 4 AoEs on the ground, one at a time, and then it'll summon 2 ads, 2 ghost ads. And then after about 4 different AoEs, it'll do a circle AoE, a line AoE times 2. It'll go to the middle to cast a terror. If you leave the ads alive when it casts this terror, these ads will actually have it enrage and cast a pretty heavy shot that will probably kill you as a Machinist. I think you can survive as a tank, but you're probably gonna die as a Machinist. So you have 2 options here. You either do a speed kill, which I'm gonna demonstrate the speed kill, or when the ads go in, you kill the ads, and then you just deal with the boss after that, okay? Now, with the Lust, and based on our level, which is 60, you're going to be at full power, so you'll see the amount of damage that Machinist can pull off here, which is very good. And once again, we are not using a sustaining potion here because we are sitting at our 20, and we're trying to restrict the usage of it, so this is going to be useful for people who don't have sustaining potions right now. That actual hit is not going to do too much. The puddle is going to do a lot, but not the actual hit. I'm going to do 5 here, I'm going to hop out here. I'm going to start with the reassemble drill. I'm going to drop my turret, I'm going to do our full burst here, and we're going to focus all of our damage on the boss. Now, again, if you are kind of a little bit unsure of your damage, you're like, I can't really hit the damage that well, it's perfectly fine. When the ads show up after this AoE, kill the ads out, you know? If you're not, like, let's say under 40% by the time the ads show up, just kill the ads, you'll be fine. And the ads are here, you'll see it on my left bar, there's the boot over there, there's the boot over there. Tactician is going to be good just to mitigate some damage, but we'll focus in on the boss. Again, it's 4 AoEs by the time the boss decides to do his enrage. Completely dead. I would say at even level 58, we are 60 at the moment, but at level 58, you'll still be okay to kill it that fast. If you're even lower than that, you may want to consider handling the ads and do it a little bit slower. So keep that in consideration. And that's floor 40. 41 plus. We're going to get into our deep dungeon focus mode. So this will be, you're going to finally see us go a lot quicker. We're going to be a lot more speedy with our climb. We're going to be doing a lot more just like killing enough to get the exit, going to the exit. You're probably going to see us start skipping some chests, although I still do have to open some silver chests, so we're going to be checking at least a couple rooms. But this is where, like, you know, we spent the time earlier to kind of go a little bit more slower, a little bit more casual to kind of keep the levels up. Again, something I recommend for newer runners, not so much the veteran runners. You know, once you kind of got a couple runs under your belt, you can feel like you can push it, you can go a little bit faster. As long as you keep it safe, you don't take too many risks. You want to get consistency through these lower floors, because these lower floors are a slog. Let's be real. Like, a lot of people complain, like, oh, 1 to 50, I gotta get through there before it gets hard. But you have to get through these floors. So you do want to try to, in my opinion, try to keep consistency on it. So at least you know, once you start a run, you know, okay, it'll take 3, 4, it'll take like 5, 6, 7 hours to get back to where you were. But hey, at least guaranteed, provided you don't disconnect, provided, you know, something else doesn't happen, you'll get back to those higher floors. So here, we're going to play a little, still going to play a little carefully, but you'll see we're going to go a little bit faster while we talk about stuff going in. So let's hop on in. 61, I'm sorry, my arm and armor is 61. 41 to 50, let's go in. As we have been, we're going to open with a strength here to kind of speed up our killing in general. One thing that's interesting to note about the 41 set is that you will need actually a couple, like, the kill count required to get off the floor is going to be a little bit higher than it was before. So average-wise on these lower floors, you're probably looking at between 4 and maybe about 8, 9. So average, you're looking at 5 to 6. But here you can probably get a little bit closer to 6 kills to get off a floor, as opposed to like on the lower end of 5, so on and so forth. So, you know, just if it feels like it's taking a little longer to get off the rooms, it's not you, it's definitely the floor. One thing historically to point out about Palace of the Dead and this set, originally, when Palace of the Dead first released, it only released 1 to 50. So theoretically, this was like endgame for Palace of the Dead. I mean, there was going to be a 51 to 200. Like, they had said, oh, you know, later on, we're going to release the harder floors. I believe they're called the Hellspawn floors. But first, here's the first 50. And also, part of that challenge, you only could get your arm and armor to 30-30. That is as high as the arm and armor can go. And I think that is under cap for this set. So this was kind of endgame and very difficult to actually get through. So that's why there's just a little bit of a difficulty spike here on 41, but in my opinion, not as drastic as the walking into the 21 to 30 set. Here you're at your full level typically, or you're like at least 58, 59. So you're working at full capacity with all your kit. So it doesn't feel like that. The enemies do hit you respectively if you're not running a steel, but it's still a floor that you want to give partial respect to. Now here we're going to be melting so many of the enemies because we have our full power. Here the demons are sight. The gargoyles earlier was sight. The boot earlier was sound, and they do some paralyze if they kept them alive. The knight here is proximity, so if you see a knight, you probably want to take care of it. We did the ricochet here for the extra pull, unintentional, but it is a thing. So again, you want to watch out for the ricochet if you know what you're doing. I'm gonna check this bronze chest because we are limited on our potshots at the moment, so I'll be lucky if I pick one up here. Not quite. I think you can only get them starting at 4 like I mentioned earlier, but hey, we'll check all the bronze chests regardless. Gargoyle Manticore. Patrol Manticore. These guys are always funny because they are very quiet. Here on the lower floors, they are just going to do Ripper Claw and an AoE. Not too deadly like they are on the later floors, but... Moving along, so here you can see our speed is much faster. I don't have to worry about experience points. I don't have to worry about my levels anymore. And now we're just gonna start going kind of what Machinist is really good with. The damage and the speed, and why this job is something that is a popular job, because it does make up a lot of time. Pulling the knight here. Gonna big burst on the Manticore, which is already dead. See that? That's a drill. That's a reassembled drill with strength on. Hugging these walls as tight as possible. We do have steel because we can be a little bit riskier. So now we're playing a little bit more kind of, you know, with more mobility, more kind of the style that you'll see me play. And this is where, like, you can get to this comfort level. Like, you'll see, like, there's a shift in terms of how we played on the first 40 into how we're playing now, you know? pull it in the back, killing in, so on and so forth. This might not be enough because of the typical higher kill count, but we'll see how it goes. I can go to the other room to pull something if needed. Okay, it is it. So we're gonna go to the other rooms. No problem. Like I said, the kill count tends to be a little bit higher, but that's to be expected on this particular set. Intuition. Alright, so let's kill the demon. Reassemble drill here. I'm gonna get that bronze chest, because again, we do need pot shards. We got one free pot shard earlier, which was very nice and very, very good to see. You are gonna get a guaranteed pot shard by killing 50. And that's where you can at least start building your sustaining potions, etc. Alright. As a reminder, we started with 20 on this run. Kind of assuming that, like, let's say you at least beat floor 50 one time. Your armor is somewhere respectable. We started at 59 today. So you should at least have a little bit of pot shards. I mean, even if you have 0, we haven't used a single potion because we did start at 20. You can use them, but, you know, we're trying to demonstrating how you can get away without using them. Use the boot. This is sound, so you can get away from them, but I'll just kill it so it's out of the way. Hugging the walls here to get through. Switching. Okay, auto heal disable is something to note, especially when you're not running the sustaining potions, because you will not get your HP back. So in this instance, we want to be just a little bit careful that we don't take too much damage. We do have our mega potions that are still on our hotbar here, so we can definitely use them. But we'll definitely do a little bit more kiting, as you can see. This is where the specialty of Machinist really kicks in. You kind of pull something, then run away from it, and they have to chase you down. And by the time they chase you down, they're probably dead. So that's one thing that is a big benefit on Machinist here. Going over here to get the next couple of pulls. There was another bronze chest here. I will check just in case we do get a pot shard here. Yep. I'm gonna check the other room in case there's another chest there as well. X potion. There is a lot of bronze chests here. Okay. And there's our first instance of the max potion. We will put on the max potion on the next set. Or actually in my case, I'll put on the max potion for a little bit, but I'll just keep the max potion. Yeah, we'll just use max potion. It is worthy to note that if you do have hyper potions due to like Eureka Orthos or something, they are going to be superior. But max potions are what's dropped in Palace of the Dead. And let's say you're someone that's like on a free trial or something, and you haven't gotten that far, you don't have access to it, then fair, you're not going to have hyper potions. You don't have to go and get hyper potions, so we will stick it to max potions on this one. Alright, so we're gonna have the first case of the new patrols here, which are the Wraiths. The Wraiths are not a problem. They are going to do their minimal type of attacks. They are proximity, so that's one thing. Proximity patrols are kind of a little bit annoying. They will just do their large AoE scream in place, so it's a gigantic point blank. But you can just run away from it. You can also interrupt it if needed. Oh, I need the chest. Okay. Hellhounds. An old PvP mount. They are sight, they do double attacks, but not too bad here. Even on the later floors, they're gonna be too bad at all. I do want... Okay, here's our first Mimic from a gold chest. As mentioned, 41 starts off, but the Mimics will be from gold chests moving forward. You will not get a gold chest from silver or bronze, period. Starting from now, they are going to come from bronze chests. I do want to get to that silver chest because of my arm and armor. Got the strength, we'll kill this here. We're moving along. This is like the specialty of Machinist right here. It's the kiting. As we're moving along, trying to get to room A, we are kiting it from room B, so on and so forth. I'm gonna walk here to avoid the aggro on the boot just for practice 6. Popping the silver chest here, no go here. Okay. Pulling the knight because it's proximity, because it's right there, kind of blocking the exit, so we'll pull it here. I'm also gonna check this chest, which is fine. Serenity, don't need it. Alrighty. And that's a dead hellhound. We're going to the exit here. 10 minutes into the first 5 floors. We had been averaging about 30 minutes per floor on the previous sets, especially with all the extra explanation. You're going faster. At least 1 debuff. Okay, auto heal disable again. I'm gonna use the the mega potion to heal myself here. You have the persona that are now new. They are proximity. They are going to be doing a paralyzed cast. If you leave them alive long enough, you probably won't. But you can interrupt the paralyze after they do start casting. It's like a paralyze 3 that you'll see with a really long cast. Can be interrupted, but they're probably not going to get to it. Yeah, I have to watch my HP here because we do not have sustaining potions running at the moment. With the auto heal disabled here. There's a Wraith taking care of the Wraith. We are off the floor, but we still need to actually get off the floor. I'm gonna skip a couple enemies here. I'm gonna check the chest as we're moving along. I'm gonna let that ghost go by so we don't have to deal with it. I'm gonna go a sight here, which is fantastic. So we don't have to deal with some traps, waiting for the ghost to go by. Alright, let's go. Killing the Wraith because it's coming at me. Gonna walk past the boot. I did mention it is sound, I believe. This Blood Guard is Sight, Flying Demon, which is interesting because in Heaven on High, this is actually not Sight, it is proximity. But in Palace of the Dead, it is Sight. Not too bad, it does a couple double attacks. But in this lower floor, not too concerning right now. Let's go. Going to 47. Getting closer to the 50 boss. As you see, our HP is kind of a little spicy here, but also the auto heal isn't helping. But the things do hit kind of respectable, especially if you start getting like multiple. First instance of the dragon, typically in Deep Dungeon, typically in Palace of the Dead. One little bit of rule of thumb, the bigger they are, the more HP they have. And the dragons, the chimeras later on, they are pretty beefy in terms of their HP pool. So if it feels like they're taking a little bit longer to kill compared to something else, it is not you, it is literally because they just have more HP. So something to note. They are kind of sometimes the easier ones, at least depending on which dragon you're fighting. But that one in particular is not too deadly. Gonna pull this with me. Again, we are hugging walls to avoid the traps as best as we can. Alright, more rooms here. I'm gonna get that bronze chest just in case it could be a potsherd here. Pulling the personas, multiple, because they could be blocking me. Okay, that one not so much. Gonna proceed, check the chest here. Good. Let's find the exit. I get the Hellhound. Oh, sprinting. As noted, we are skipping rooms more. We are going a little bit quicker. We don't need the levels. We don't need the kills. So we are moving at a much faster pace right now. Popping that strength can be really useful. Great! That might aggro. Oh, that's going to aggro. Proximity is the persona. Now, one little bit I'll point out there. You're essentially, it isn't until like floor, let's say 131 or 141, where you actually need to start caring about the palms that you have at your disposal. So it is probably going to be beneficial to you to consider keeping a lot of your Pomanders to 2. Now, in today's run, you're going to see me be just a little bit conservative on some of the Pomanders, just for the sake that we can focus more on, you know, the enemies, the pulls, the actual encounters, so on and so forth. But definitely consider using Poms a little bit more aggressively. Keep the flights at 2, keep the rages at 2, so on and so forth. Because it can help you speed through the floors. Like, if you're worried about, oh, it's taking so long, it's a slog, you have things that can speed you up, and you don't have to necessarily wait for the extra palm to come in. You can just use them right away. Here I'm going to Witching here. The damage will be a little high here because I don't have the steel currently on. I'm going to be using AoE here just to kind of get rid of this Luring Trap that I happen to step on. It probably was very subtle about the Luring Trap as I was kind of yapping away, but I saw the enemy list show up with 3, so we definitely hit a Luring Trap in this situation. But it's okay. Our first instinct here was to Witching to handle it. No problem there. And then we move on. Like, try to make your instinct on a Luring Trap. If you're not 100% sure what to do, make your first instinct a Witching. Because amongst anything else, what will happen is you give yourself 30 seconds to decide what you actually want to do. Now, on these lower floors, the enemies are going to die pretty fast, so 30 seconds is going to be more than enough time to pin them down. On the higher floors, look, 30 seconds can be like, okay, what am I doing? Am I going to sack myself? Am I going to rage? Can I kill what's in front of me? So it buys you a lot of time to make those decisions. So let Witching be your first answer to a Luring Trap. And hopefully you haven't used too many of them, or you haven't stepped on a lot of Luring Traps and you actually still have Witchings available. I'm going to pop a Steel here, by the way. We are in 49, so we're going to be getting to the boss very soon. So I'm going to pop the Steel here, so it actually helps me on this current floor as we kind of get off this floor. Now, the Gravekeeper that we just killed, that is a sound enemy, but it is a patrol. Arguably one of the harder hitting enemies in Deep Dungeon, depending on the floor set that they're on. They are kind of spooky, they do kind of hit you pretty hard. They are manageable though, because you could CC them, so on and so forth. But it is worth noting that they are indeed sound, so you could avoid them if you really wanted to. Alright, let me just check the room to the south just in case there's anything useful there, and then we will proceed. Alright, I'm gonna check this one chest and then we will go... Actually, I'll check this room. I'm still hunting down silver chests because, we are still looking for Aether Pool, but we'll go through. So we didn't get much in the Aether Pool department. Also, to be fair, I did start skipping rooms here, but we didn't actually get too many upgrades, but that's perfectly fine. As I mentioned earlier on, because it is italicized in yellow, it means it is capped, and we are actually getting synced down to a lower arm and armor to whatever the floor is the maximum of. So even though we're at 61, 62, 61, we're not operating at 62, 61. We're operating maybe at about 40-ish or like 45-ish, if that makes sense. This coming boss, interesting boss. Funny, it's actually better solo than it is with people, because you can actually die to this boss because other people don't know how to handle this boss. Very easy boss in terms of what its mechanics has. It is good old Edda, if you know the lore of Deep Dungeon. It is part of the lore of Tamtar and Tamtar Hard. We're going to open it with a Lust here to kind of kill this a little bit better. I do like to fight her in the middle here, and just to keep the fight generally in the middle. She goes through a couple attacks here. Nothing spectacular. Again, we are running without any actual sustaining potions. Here we stay close to her because she will do this donut. Sometimes she will do a point blank directly after, but in this case not so much. If you were hit by that AoE, you'll start to see the floor start to glow because she is getting power. It's like it's almost like a reverse damage down, if you will. Her Black Honeymoon will get stronger the more you get hit within health. So try not to get hit with this, especially if you're kind of limited on your healing. Well, that's the out. Now we're back in, and you can see we are melting Edda here. No real issue here. You can squeeze in Tacticians. If she will do a Gaze, if the Gaze goes off the Cold Feet, you'll get Hysteria, and you'll run away from the boss, which could be a little bit of a bad wombo combo because she typically follows in with her in-health move. So just turn, respect mechanic. Usually it follows up with a point blank, and there it is. That's usually what happens, but if you do a lot of damage to her, it's almost like you skip phases, which is why she wasn't doing that quite a bit. And what's one reason why keeping her in the middle is not a terrible idea, because you just kind of, you know, keep it nice and easy. Around this part, she'll summon some adds on the outside if she lives long enough, which will add some AoEs on the ground, but they are pretty easy. It'll also wombo combo into her donut over here. Wait for those to go off and go back in. Again, this is a fight where, because when you take damage from in health, it adds damage to Black Honeymoon. If you're with other people and they don't know how to deal with those mechanics, it actually causes it more of a treacherous situation, because you're inadvertently taking more damage because your other friends can't even, you know, do the mechanics. That's why solo is a little bit better. Well, that's the first 50. And notable here, 1, you actually do get a +1/+1 guaranteed arm and armor. So that's really nice if your arm and armor is a 99. And after we clear the set, you will get a potsherd coming in. So now we have 2 potsherds from the run. So we got 1 earlier, and we get the guaranteed from 50 on this set, which is good, because this transfers into 20 sustaining potions, which is one of the things that you need for the run in itself. So that is what do you want to 50.